and direct action in their fight for better pay for low-wage workers. The Fight for 15 strike was the latest in a series targeting fast food restaurants in over 100 U.S. cities, calling for an increase in hourly wages for workers in the highly profitable industry to $15. Workers were arrested at rallies and sit-ins at McDonald's restaurants ranging from Boston, Philadelphia, and New York to Los Angeles, Las Vegas, and Little Rock, Arkansas. Dunkin' Donuts employee Erica Concepcion was arrested for taking part in a civil disobedience action in Roslindale, Massachusetts.
I'm fighting because it's the right thing to do. If being arrested has to come with that, then so be it. No questions asked about it. I'll do it again.
In a unanimous decision Thursday, the 7th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals in Chicago ruled that same-sex marriage bans in Wisconsin and Indiana violate the U.S. Constitution. The ruling sets the stage for the two states to join 19 others in the District of Columbia in marriage equality. The decisions come a mere 9 days after attorneys presented oral arguments before the court. The court was skeptical of the reasons given by the states for excluding same-sex couples from the institution of marriage. Marie Carlson was one of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit.
I'm actually still kind of stunned. It took us all by surprise because none of us expected it to come through this quickly. The judges seemed at the hearing like they would not have a problem ruling in our favor, but it's still exciting when you finally get that confirmation. We have grandchildren together. For 8 years, we've wanted to get married and make our family legal.
The Indiana case argued that same-sex couples were entitled under the 14th Amendment to due process, the fundamental right to marry, and equal protection under the U.S. Constitution. While the majority of other cases across the nation in the last year found same-sex couples have the fundamental right to marry, Lambda Legal staff attorney Paul Castillo, who represented the plaintiffs in the challenge against Indiana's ban, says today's decision went further.
It evaluated and recognized the harm there are to same-sex couples. That harm is not outweighed by excuses that the state proffers in support of excluding these loving and committed families.
Stays against same-sex marriage remain in effect, as both states will be appealing to the U.S. Supreme Court. If the court takes up the case, it will join those from Utah, Oklahoma, and Virginia currently before them when they return from recess at the end of September.
Workers Independent News is brought to you with support from union-owned and represented Bank of Labor, member FDIC, equal opportunity lender. The Bank of Labor is the bank of choice for unions and their members. Now you can do business with a bank that shares labor values. More info online at bankoflabor.com.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
This town gonna be here long after I'm gone. East side, west side, people don't surrender. They've been down, but they're still right on. Oh, and this time is my time. Oh, you're the hater, it don't matter. I'm gonna stand and fight. This time is my time. She got her ups and downs, but love or hate, it don't matter. But this is my time.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here on this Friday. Thank goodness, the end of the week. I've been looking forward to this day all week long with the news that's been going on and all of the insanity. Today's going to be a good day. Also going to do a lot of looking toward the weekend. Yesterday's fast food strike, all of the protests around the country, and people coming together out into the streets. An amazing glimmer of hope. We're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about our enormous trade deficit, the jobs numbers in, Oh, lots of that. Also, corporate accountability. Can we get some accountability? Can we get some sunshine in the house? The hope is yes. And to me, it's one of these things that you would think already in place. One of those things that you would have thought years ago that the investors would have wanted. But again, when you think about it from the other perspective, the investor class, they don't really want to know how you make them their money, just as long as their pockets are full. And I guess that's the bottom line in all of it. Doesn't matter how, just as long as the money's in the pockets. And as I said, the job numbers out. August employment numbers saw non-payroll employment up 142,000 for the month of August. Unemployment unchanged, 6.1%. The big job gains were in the business and professional services, also and in healthcare. Over the last year, unemployment down by 1.1%, or you can look at it this way, 1.7 million more people found jobs. That's a good thing. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, among the major worker groups, the unemployment rate in August showed little or no change for men, 5.7%. For women, adult women, 5.7%. Teenagers, 19.6%. Whites, 5.3%. Blacks, 11.4%. Hispanics, 7.5%. Asians had the lowest rate at 4.5%. Jobs all around. The jobs numbers for the long-term unemployed, those people who have been unemployed longer than 27 weeks, because there are no federal extensions anymore. So once you hit that 26 weeks, 27, you're on your own, and no longer, amazingly, considered unemployed. So another 192,000 people to the curb. So now you've got 3 million people, I guess, in that long-term range. So those are going to be more people that fall out. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, these individuals accounted for 31% of the unemployed. Over the past 12 months, the number of long-term unemployed has declined by 1.3 million. Because basically, I would argue that they were just subtracted. They're not collecting benefits, so we don't count them anymore. Labor participation unchanged, 62.8%. That has been unchanged since April. So as the rate has gone down, labor participation has stayed about the same, which I guess is an interesting kind of thing. The part-time jobs. These are part-time folks who, they don't have a choice. There aren't enough hours for them. They were cut back, whatever. That number remained unchanged at 7.3 million individuals working part-time. And you go down through more of the report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 2.1 million people were marginally attached to the labor force. So that's down from a year ago. These individuals, they're not counted in the labor force, but they wanted and were available for work. They had looked for work at some point in the last year, but just not counted in unemployment because of the fact that they hadn't looked in the last 4 weeks, I guess. And I don't know how they figured that out. So if you put that together with the number of unemployed, because there are 9.6 million unemployed right now, you throw that together with the people who are marginally attached but not counted, you've got about 11.7 million. Then you throw in the discouraged workers. Those are the ones that are marginally attached. And I love the language here. Another 775,000 people. They were marginally attached or discouraged because they don't believe there's a job for them. They want a job. They're kind of looking out the side of their eye, but there's nothing available for them. You add another 1.4 million to those folks, the marginally attached, the discouraged, if you will, and you come up with a whopping number of nearly 14 million people unemployed. So again, you go back to this whole thing. We have a major jobs crisis going on in this country, and a lot of it, to me, comes back to our insane trade deals. And as we talked about yesterday, we've got a trade deficit with China. And I love the headlines. The headlines were fantastic. Trade deficit with China drops. So everyone goes, oh, wow, that's great. The deficit dropped. Yeah, it dropped from $40.8 billion down to just $40.5 billion. And you go, hold on a second. That doesn't seem right. That isn't much. I guess it's somewhat accurate, somewhat. But when you look at the fact that we didn't add any new manufacturing jobs, and the million manufacturing jobs that President Obama promised that he was going to pursue, we're only at about 193,000. You start asking the question, is it our policies that are killing us? And the truth of the matter is, yeah, it's our policies. So when you've got some 14 million people unemployed, and when you've got these massive trade deficits, there's a jobs problem. And one of those things that grabbed my attention, Jen sent me an email last night, asking about if the unemployment rates. Here's what she wrote: if the unemployment rate is dropping, why is food stamp enrollment increasing? And that's an interesting question. I mean, she sent me a story that says, the welfare, the food stamp participation is going up. And if more people are working, the unemployment rate is falling. And if the economy's recovering, why are more people going toward food stamps? Because last year we saw a peak of about 47.6 million people. Right now we're just a little bit down from that. But still, you're still talking about 15% of the population. Whereas in 2010, it was 13.2%, which, I say that as, well, we expanded the access for some folks, which I think is a good thing. But you go back to the pre-recession levels, the pre-Bush, and remember, go back to this and think about it. All of this is caused because of the Bush recession. That collapse in September of 2008 did major damage, but that recession began months before. But in 2007, you saw 26 million people collecting food stamps. And now what we've got is a 76% increase in the people collecting the food stamps. And I'm not against it. So the question is the nation really recovering? Are we having an economic recovery, or are there just a bunch of really crappy, low-paying jobs? That's part of the question. And you look at the numbers, according to the Department of Agriculture. In 2012, people between 18 and 59 collected food stamps. There were about 21.3 million of them. Now, if you've got 14 million unemployed, which all of them don't qualify, how many working poor do you have? If you've got all of these people, 46.5 million people collecting food stamps, how many of these people are the working poor? And I got to be honest, I got to ask the question. If we've got all of these people who are getting food stamps and they're working, shouldn't we do something with the minimum wage? Right now you have 20.5 million children. That means 1 out of every 3 kids in this country collecting some type of food stamps. And the number of children collecting some type of nutrition assistance is even higher than that. And the reality is, like I said, wages simply are not growing. And what's interesting to me is everyone seems to be waiting for this mythical invisible hand, the invisible claw, to magically push wages up. But guess what? Not going to happen. Not going to happen. Only 2 ways wages go up. 1, extremely tight labor market. We haven't seen that since the Clinton years, to where there's really no one left to take these jobs, and that then spurs competition, and then you have rising wages, to which you will find a way to get around that by importing more people and pushing that down. But that's a whole other argument. And the other part is for workers to demand it and fight for it, which is what we saw yesterday in the street all across the country. And like we talked about yesterday, the very top of the economic scale doing very, very well. In fact, the people making over $220,000 saw an increase of 2% in their wages. The bottom 60% of us, actually, we lost money. Wages actually went down. So if we're all recovering, if the economy's coming back, there are more jobs, what we're seeing is falling wages for the working people. You're seeing a redistribution from people who work to the people who, well, don't. And that's pretty much our problem. And without a strong, vibrant, organized labor movement, I don't see it changing anytime soon. Which is why I'm excited to see the fast food workers, and I'm excited to see the retail workers saying, enough already, enough of the crummy wages, enough of me having to beg for food stamps and then be ridiculed and degraded and demeaned because my family need it. And I'm with them. Bottom line, if you work your 40 hours a week, you shouldn't have to ask for a handout. Seems pretty simple to me. But today, lots to get to. Your thoughts, your questions, your comments. You can email me anytime, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Say the USA is drowning in crafted lies. Say the USA and resume the ties it binds. Stop taking all our money and shipping it offshore. Do the job you're looking for.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
This is your world in 2. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, reporting for Talk Radio News Service at the United Nations. North American and European leaders began meeting in Wales today to kick off a major NATO summit. Afghanistan and the Islamic State are both on the agenda, as are future increases in military spending and the situation in Ukraine.
On defense investment, we will turn the corner and reverse the trend of declining defense budgets.
That was NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen, who said he'd like to see NATO members dedicate more of their budgets, or roughly 2% of GDP, to defense expenditure. Across the 28-country alliance, only 4 countries, the United States, the United Kingdom, Greece, and Estonia, meet or exceed that amount, while 8 nations spend 1% or less of GDP on defense. Meanwhile, in Russia, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is warning NATO members against extending membership in the alliance to Ukraine. In remarks published by Russian state media, Lavrov said NATO membership for Ukraine would constitute a national security risk and would be seen as, quote, a blatant attempt to derail all efforts aimed at initiating dialogue on ensuring national reconciliation in Ukraine. In a major act of Russian defiance, France announced that it will not deliver a state-of-the-art helicopter warship that had been built for the Russian Navy. France's plans up until yesterday to fulfill the order of 2 so-called Mistral-class ships had attracted widespread international condemnation amid efforts to isolate the Russian military from cutting-edge technology. There has been talk of NATO acquiring the warships upon their completion, but as of yet, no buyer has been announced. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Allie Bogan. Former George Washington University President Stephen Joel Trachtenberg is under fire for comments he made on NPR's The Diane Rehm Show, where he argued that women should be, quote, trained not to drink in excess so that they can fend off potential rapists. On Fox News' Outnumbered, Lou Dobbs vocalized his support for Trachtenberg's comments.
Why should there be anything controversial about it? Losing control of oneself, exposing oneself, and creating tremendous vulnerability is, to me, a disastrous choice for anyone to make, boy or girl.
But Dobbs' dismissal of sexual assault as a problem that can be solved by teaching women not to excessively drink is faulty. According to a literature review from the National Institutes of Health, while consuming too much alcohol may play a role in encouraging damaging behavior, quote, the fact that alcohol consumption and sexual assault frequently co-occur does not demonstrate that alcohol causes sexual assault. For more on this and other stories, visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
Reach up for the sunrise, put your hands into the big sky. You can touch the sunrise, feel a new day enter your life.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. So yesterday there was a press conference in front of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission there in Washington, D.C. to hand over 1 million comments saying, hey, from investors, from activists, from people across the country saying, hey, SEC, mandate that corporations tell their shareholders, and I think everyone, where they're spending their money on politics. If they're a publicly traded company, if shareholders are involved, if tax dollars are involved, don't you think we should know how they're spending that money and what they're getting for their lobbying efforts? Well, here to talk a little bit about this, I've asked Timothy Smith. He's the director of ESG Shareholder Engagement. Also, he's with Walden Asset Management. Tim, thanks for taking time for us.
Glad to do it.
So, as I talked about this yesterday, it's my view that if a publicly traded company has shareholders, if they're taking government tax dollars, we should, as a matter of course, know how they're spending that money, and especially on politics, and what they're doing with our tax dollars.
Exactly right, and that's why 1 million people and investors have signed a petition to the Securities and Exchange Commission to ask them to require companies to do that through a rule. In fact, for the last 10 years, there have been investors knocking at company doors individually, asking them to be transparent, to be open, and to be fair. Over 150 major U.S. companies have already done this. They put their information on the website. They talk about who they give political contributions to, why, and how, what the oversight is. And for some companies like Procter & Gamble or Goldman Sachs or J.P. Morgan or IBM, they explain they don't make political contributions and why, too. So it's a chance to set the record straight for a company if they are making political contributions. The concern is that there, especially in this election coming up, we're all going to watch tens of millions of what we call dark money dollars going into the political campaign.
Right.
So an individual or a union or a company could give a contribution to a third-party organization, which is hidden, and then that money goes into attack ads against political figures in the election. So
let me
we watched the Chamber of Commerce doing this in a very big way. We're talking about them trying to raise well over $100 million to do this.
Yeah, you said that unions do this, and I would argue that maybe they do, but on their LM2s, they definitely have to expose and let people know where that money is being spent. So for those folks who I get people telling me, well, corporations don't have to do it, neither do unions. No, unions actually have to divulge.
They're absolutely right. And for years, you're dead right. Unions are all their information is in the public domain, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and I want to make sure that people understand that, because I'm in favor of transparency. I like sunshine. Sunshine is one of the greatest disinfectants we can have. And if we've got, as you've said, this dark money floating around and not knowing where it's coming from, that's a huge, huge problem as far as I'm concerned.
It's a problem for our democracy. It's actually a problem for companies, too, because imagine a company who makes contributions like this and then it gets out.
Right.
And their own brand or image can be badly hurt by even, $25,000 that goes into a campaign that is very controversial. Even when money is given above board. For example, Chevron last year gave well over $1 million, or 2 years ago, to Mitt Romney's super PAC. Well, why in heaven's name should share owner money be used to try to support a political candidate? That's a different question, but it's not hidden contributions, but it's heavy dollars going in to try to affect elections.
Right. There are a couple of things there. One, I personally don't think corporations should be giving money to political candidates at all. I just don't think that that should happen at all. If individuals want to, that's fine. I don't think companies should. I don't think legal constructs should be able to do that. I don't think it's their arena.
And there's a strong argument for that. It is, unfortunately, after Citizens United, it's their quotes right to do so. But let's be clear too. One of the reasons transparency is so important is that a lot of companies after Citizens United didn't just step in and say, I'm going to double or triple my political spending. After all, this is share owner dollars. They want to make sure they're a company that wants to make sure that any expenditure they make is going to pay off for them, right? And the chamber poured money into the last election and had a dismal record, so that companies that were putting money in through the back door, through the chamber, watched really a huge failure rate as the chamber's candidates just didn't succeed. There's other ways in which money funding from companies is we think, very destructive. So, support for a group like the American Legislative Exchange Council, right. ALEC. As ALEC gets to work on everything from fighting immigration reform to trying to stop renewable energy legislation and regulation at the state level. So we have companies like Google and Pfizer and, big name companies that are members of ALEC, Exxon, putting $49,000 into them. And here are dollars that are going to work that really, I think, hurt us in numerous ways. And it's also terrible for many companies that have an image that they're trying to protect. And as a result, 85 companies have left ALEC, right, which includes Walmart and it includes Microsoft and many other big names that just feel that those dollars aren't well spent.
Well, because it's attracted a lot of negative attention. And this is where I think this whole push to open up and be more transparent with how companies spend their money on politics is important, especially from an investor's point of view, because you don't want to spend money on a company that all of a sudden you find out, oh, wait a minute, they're investing in something politically, ideologically or politically that I'm not into, and I think it's going to cost me money. Because as we've seen with a number of companies that they get boycotted for something, their share prices go down, and there's your asset diminished.
That's right, and you especially are concerned when a CEO has a cozy political tie with certain political leaders and wants to put company money to work there. It's just not an appropriate use of shareowner money. So there is risk, even if a small contribution. I can remember an example of a bank that made a $5,000 contribution to a judge's race in the South, and the judge wound up having a very racist record, and it was very embarrassing to the bank, and it was a sign of them not having real oversight or control of their political spending. It was done sort of by a local branch, right, or a local division. So you're absolutely right. Investors have a stake, as do citizens, in knowing what companies or individuals, wealthy individuals, or other institutions, unions and others, what they're doing in this political arena. And as you said, unions for years have been transparent and above board about their spending. And unfortunately, corporate dollars for many companies are still done in secret.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show here with Tim Smith. He's the director of ESG Shareholder Engagement. Also, he's with Walden Asset Management. The website, if you want more information on what we're talking about, corporatereformcoalition.org. Tons of information there. And if you still want to make a comment, I understand on the site, folks can still make a comment and add to that million. Is that correct, Tim?
That's absolutely right. This is an open petition. We announced yesterday we had 1 million, a milestone. Never had that many comments go to the Securities and Exchange Commission on any issue in its history. But it's an open petition, and we will be striving to get more individuals and investors signing the petition.
So as I understand, this has been going on for some time, and at one point this had actually made it onto the agenda. Now not so much. Walk me through the process of how this got off the agenda.
Absolutely right. When Mary Shapiro was the chair of the Securities and Exchange Commission, even though they had a very heavy agenda, she put this on their work plan, on their agenda for the year. And when Mary Jo White came in as chair, she was really grilled by some Republicans in the Senate during some hearings, and this was one of the major issues that was put on the table. Unfortunately, she then dropped this as one of their topics for priority attention for this year. So yesterday, many speakers who were standing in front of the SEC at this press event said, we thought that 1 million signatures were enough to show huge public concern and investor concern that meant this should be put back on the SEC's agenda.
Right.
So that would be what we'd hope into 2015.
Yeah, I understand it completely from an investor standpoint, but also from a taxpayer's point of view. Because a lot of these companies, and I look at the money that is spent on lobbying, for instance, that maybe a lot of companies, I don't know if they disclose their lobbying costs or not, but I think investors should know. But I also think taxpayers who are giving tax dollars to these companies should know our tax dollars are going to companies who are then taking money and doing this, and this with it.
Well, that's right. So just talking about the other side of the coin for a second, because lobbying dollars by companies far outsurpass the money put into election campaigns. Or through third parties during elections. And so we're talking about companies who have significant personal or company representatives, but also, again, every dollar that a member of the Chamber of Commerce pays as dues, 50% of those dollars, roughly 50%, between 45 and 50, goes toward lobbying. So we see some very good companies that are members of the Chamber for business reasons who watch with dismay while their dues dollars get used for, say, suing the Environmental Protection Agency on climate change or other things that really don't are not their own stands or their own values.
I've often wondered how the Chamber of Commerce balances that, does that balancing act when they lobby heavily to destroy the EPA when they have a lot of alternative energy members.
Yes, they listen to their big. They certainly listen to their big funders and their prominent members. But you're right. There is quite a series, a different range of opinions within the members of the chamber. But there are a lot of smaller companies that are so dismayed by what the chamber does that they formed their own business association, the American Sustainable Business Council.
Right.
And these are companies who are striving there, smaller companies in our economy, trying to make a profit and serve the public. And they've decided to create their own association that can speak their mind in a way that they feel reflects their integrity.
Now, lobbying dollars and political dollars are different, correct?
That's exactly right. Lobbying dollars, again, you do disclose that through the Senate every quarter, but you don't necessarily have to disclose what you've done through third parties or in coalitions with others, and you don't necessarily talk about what your oversight is of lobbying. So AFSCME and about 50 other investors, including our own firm, Walden Asset Management, have been asking companies to disclose their lobbying activities in dollars and what the priorities are. So that, again, we'd like to know if a company who on one side says they really stand for the environment and protecting the environment, then is spending money lobbying directly or indirectly against the Environmental Protection Agency. That kind of contradiction is very worrisome to investors.
Yeah, and worrisome that, to me, all of this money, and I guess the end of this is, Monday is the historic vote in the Senate, and I don't expect the vote on the constitutional amendment to I guess define who a person is and put some limits on spending. I don't expect that amendment to move forward, but the discussion that I think it's going to bring, I think, is important, because at some point our political structure has got to pull money out of this system, because it's just getting obscene. It's getting to the point where average people are nowhere capable of running for any office. Like you said, the judge is getting money from a bank. Something wrong there.
Right, and the vote on Monday will be historic because it will focus in on the Citizens United decision and the need to try to turn the clock back to a reasoned time when back in 2010, for example, we did not see hundreds of millions of dollars of corporate or wealthy individual money going into the election campaign. It may not succeed, but indeed it will raise the issue in a sharp way that hasn't been raised for a while, and it's a very important educational moment.
There you go. And if you want to chime in on this and say, hey, SEC, give us some sunshine, you can go to corporatereformcoalition.org or thericksmithshow.com. Click on Tim Smith's name, take you right there. Tim, it was great talking with you. I appreciate you taking time for us.
Glad to do it. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Let's take a quick break. Right back with your thoughts. 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Thought-provoking, intelligent conversation with a heart. The voice of the working class. Rick Smith.
Gross negligence means the company acted with willful or wanton misconduct or reckless indifference.
Accountability for BP in the Gulf oil disaster.
Flames shooting as high as 1,000 feet in the air.
Accountability for PG&E in the deadly California pipeline explosion. California legislature bans plastic bags, regulates groundwater for the first time in history. Plus, celebrating 50 years of protecting America's wild lands and rivers.
All of that accountability and celebration straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Because the whole damn world is swirling down the toilet bowl, which is also full of flames. How both of those are possible, I don't know. I'm going to say fracking.
Yeah, I'll go with that too. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, it's a very busy news week in the non-green world, but I would suggest it's equally as busy this week in the green world.
Oh, yeah, you go away for a couple of days and bam, news volcano. But hey, at least there is some accountability. First up, bad news for BP.
U.S. District Court finding BP grossly negligent in the 2010 Gulf of Mexico Macondo oil spill.
It's been over 4 years since BP's Deepwater Horizon rig exploded, killing 11 men and dumping over 200 million gallons of crude oil into the Gulf over 3 months, the worst oil spill in the nation's history. Now, a finding of gross negligence from the U.S. District Court judge overseeing the BP trial. Now, this is worse than just regular negligence. It's a key legal threshold. It multiplies the potential fines BP could ultimately pay per barrel spilled, meaning that punitive damages could go as high as $18 billion. And that is the next fight in court, determining exactly how much of BP's oil was spilled.
Wow. So I guess we do have to wait for the next court battle, however, because I remember the Exxon Valdez spill. They got dinged with a huge fine, but they were able to go all the way up to the Supreme Court and 20 years later have it reduced down to almost nothing.
Well, it does look like BP is taking a page from that Exxon Valdez playbook. They said in a statement they will appeal the district court's ruling. Now, the judge placed the lion's share of the blame onto BP and cleared BP's partners, Transocean and Halliburton, of gross negligence. Halliburton, which was responsible for the bad cement job that caused the explosion, agreed this week to pay more than $1 billion to settle most of the lawsuits brought by individuals and businesses on the Gulf Coast. And also, not to put too fine a point on it, but if your negligence and reckless disregard killed 11 people, you'd go to prison. In other news, more corporate accountability in California.
Some first thought a plane had crashed into the neighborhood, but it was a gas pipe 3 feet underground that had ruptured and exploded. leaving a crater 30 feet wide with flames spewing out in every direction.
September 10th marks the 4th anniversary of the natural gas pipeline explosion that rocked the Bay Area town of San Bruno. 38 homes were destroyed. 8 people were killed. And now, almost 4 years to the day later, the California Public Utilities Commission has slapped pipeline owner Pacific Gas and Electric with a $1.4 billion fine for negligence that caused the explosion.
We've been talking about these companies getting off the hook with a slap on the wrist, about $1 million. $1.4 billion for PG&E sounds pretty substantial.
It does, but it is only half of what the Utility Commission's own staff recommended. Investigators discovered that PG&E had a pattern of negligence and literally thousands of violations on its network of aging pipelines going back for decades. And of course, PG&E has announced late today that they will appeal the fine.
Of course they will.
And just another reminder, if your negligence had killed 8 people, you'd go to jail.
What part of limited liability do you not understand in limited liability corporations?
Corporations are people, my friend.
Yeah, except for that going to jail part.
Also in California, the state assembly has passed a bevy of groundbreaking bills with historic impact. The nation's first ever statewide ban on single-use plastic bags, and most important perhaps, historic new rules to regulate groundwater for the first time ever amid a record and historic drought.
So up until now, farmers across the state have been pumping groundwater for free, no regulations, take as much as you like?
Unlimited, and they're draining the state's aquifers.
And that is now over, assuming that Governor Brown actually signs this legislation?
Yep, that's the first step.
I suspect those farmers will be fighting this law furiously.
Oh yeah, they'll be suing. Finally, this week marks the 50th anniversary of the signing of both the Wilderness Act and the Land and Water Conservation Act, 2 little-known but powerful conservation programs established by Congress just in time to preserve some of America's most valuable wildlands and rivers. Outdoor recreation on these protected lands generates more than $600 billion a year to the U.S. economy.
Sounds like big government regulation. Let's get rid of that immediately. For much more on all of that and the stories we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Please consider donating to our effort to report the news that matters over your public airwaves. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Oh, baby, it's a wild world. It's hard to get by, just look all the smile. This ain't the same summer song that you used to know, 'cause Jack left Diane 30 years ago. The world is spinning fast for you and me, so tell me whatever happens if the American.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. So our Governor Corbett, getting thumped in the polls. I mean, if you look at the latest Robert Morris poll, has him down more than 30 points to York businessman and Democratic candidate Tom Wolf. And for good reason, really. I mean, really, for good reason, he's getting thumped. You look at the massive education cuts to start with. That, to me, right there, bang, should be the knockout punch. I mean, you add out all the other stuff, the Act 13, the gerrymandering of the districts, the voter suppression. You just throw all of that stuff, the massive tax handouts to corporate thieves, all of this stuff, throw it all in the big pot, and it's a big, giant, floating you-know-what. So I saw this index that Huntington Bank does. They've been doing it since 2007, where they figure out how much it costs for parents to send their kids to school beyond tuition. So if tuition's free, what does it cost the average parent? And I'll tell you, my wife goes hog wild crazy. When the teacher says, I need this, my wife comes with a whole list. And we're in a position that, good, we can do that, and it's a good thing to make sure that all the kids have what they need and the teachers have what they need, because heaven forbid they don't. But, I looked at some of these numbers that Huntington Bank has thrown out, And what they said is, for a parent of an elementary school child, of which I have two, it's about $642 a piece. So for a child to go to elementary school, it's going to cost about $642 this year in out-of-pocket stuff. For middle schoolers, of which I have one, $918, and for high schoolers, about $1,284. They say high school costs up about 5%. Elementary school costs up about 11%. Middle school costs have jumped way up, 20% increase. One of the largest increases in the history of this Huntington Bank Index. They say since 2007, costs have increased 83% for elementary school students, 73% for middle school students, and 44% for high school students. So, you go back, and the thing that gets me is, I think of my generation, maybe a little bit older. When we went to school, there wasn't all of that. You didn't have to pay to play sports. You didn't have to pay I didn't even have to pay to take driver's ed, which I don't even think schools do anymore. But any of these things that you want to do no longer offered, because budgets have been so badly cut that they're now pushing this stuff off as extracurriculars, and that you have to then pay for. When I was in school, if you wanted to join the band, or if you wanted to participate in a play or any of that stuff, the costs were covered. Now I find people have got to buy their own damn uniforms, which is kind of ridiculous. And you look at all of this money that's being taken out of education. When I was in school, they had after-school programs. They were called sports and extracurriculars that you didn't have to pay for. Most of that stuff's being canceled. I've got two elementary school kids, and my daughter, my oldest daughter, she's played basketball each of the last couple of years, and the basketball league that she played in is a private league. The school helps. They allow them to use the gym for a cost. They allow them to use facilities for a cost, of course. But mostly it's private. You have to pay, and you have to pay out of your pocket. I think it was like $60, $70 for the year. When I was a kid, you didn't. None of that stuff. It was the school's team. The school had a team, and you played on the school's team. All of that stuff's being stripped away. And it's because of these budget cuts, not just here in Pennsylvania, but all across the country. And what we're doing is we're narrowing the educational experience to where it's just about getting a job. It's not about being a well-rounded human being. It's not about being involved in all of the extracurriculars that have their lessons of their own. Teamwork and stick-to-itiveness and sportsmanship and all of those things that come with sport, all the things that the discipline and the memorization that with plays and marching band and all of that stuff's being stripped out. And like I said the other day, even the very simple learning experience of how to exchange money, that's been stripped out because you can't buy lunch with cash anymore. If you don't have money on your little card, you don't get anything. And for me, education is more than just what's 2 + 2. Education is more than just, can you read this sentence? It's about critical thinking. It's about reading that damn sentence and analyzing it and thinking about what it means and why it's important and what the person who wrote it was thinking and all of those things. And my fear is we are so narrowly focused on standardized tests that we're losing all of that other enrichment. And that scares me. And I know the teachers, they desperately want to provide exactly what I'm talking about. But you have an administration who, being sent down from above with these marching orders. This is the curriculum you will teach. And I fear that we're heading to a world where, when I was in high school back in the 80s, they used to joke that the French education minister, because we used to I guess we still like to laugh at the French. But we used to joke that, in French schools, the education minister could open up a book to page 37 and say, at this very moment, every child in this school, in this entire country, is reading this sentence. because that's how narrowly defined everything was, and that's how micromanaged they had it. And you look at this stuff, and it just leaves you scratching your head, going, "Hold on, we got problems." Outside of the increase, and because look, my mother, you bought clothes, you bought pencils, stuff like that, which wasn't horribly hatefully expensive. So we think it's the same thing. And then you get into the reality of it. It's not. It's the same thing with people my age who went to college back in the 80s. And college costs were, you could work a summer job and pay most of your college off, maybe take out a loan, and at the end of it, you got $8,000 or $10,000 in loans. Kids are graduating today with $30-some thousand in debt. Completely different worlds. And why I bring this up, and I think it's important, is it's these policies that people like Governor Corbett and others of his ilk have rammed down our throats. And it's the crisis that these folks have created that have put us into this position where, Tina, there's no alternative. There is no alternative. The other day, I opened up the newspaper, and the headline read, "Congrats, you're on the hook for $14,500 in state debt." And it was basically a repeat of a PA Independent story. For those who don't know, the PA Independent is pretty much a wholly owned subsidiary of the Tea Party think tank. I shouldn't say it that way. They are, in my view, a propaganda arm for the Tea Party think tank. And they took a very simplistic piece of propaganda from this group, Truth in Accounting, that defined people and states as sinkhole states or non-sinkhole states. And Pennsylvania they called a sinkhole state because you look at our debt obligations. You look at what we have in assets and what we have in debt obligations, and we're, according to them, a sinkhole state. We're 12th on the list. And then there are sunshine states, and I love that. There are sinkhole states and there are sunshine states, which is great. But they chose to focus on the fact that Pennsylvania has a sizable debt obligation. Not horrible, but pretty substantial. 12th, we rank 12th. So many states are worse off than we are. But they looked at just very simplistic numbers, and they threw it out that each, simple math, each individual in the Commonwealth is in debt today, at this very moment, $14,500. That means if everything were to crash, everybody were to retire, everybody would be calling in their chips, each of us would have to dig up about $14,500. Now, we all know that's not going to happen. We know that's not going to happen because not everyone is going to retire tomorrow. We know that. We know the end of the world is not, everything's going to not come screeching to a halt. We know that. But they want to make it sound like, oh my God, the sky is falling. And, we have and the number that they used for the retirement, oh my goodness, that number just seems to be growing bigger and bigger. Originally, it was like 27 billion, then it was 30, then it was 35, then it was 42. Now they've jacked it up to 54 billion for the pension obligation, which, wow, that's the biggest number I've heard to date. And other liabilities that we have, about 3.2 billion in liabilities on the balance sheet, they claim. So that's where they came up with the number. They say we owe about $100 billion. We've got, we have about $39 billion. So really, we've got a debt to GDP ratio that isn't horribly hateful. It's less than 3 to 1. Which if you look at your own life, if you had a $100,000 mortgage and you made $39,000 a year, that's pretty much what we're talking about. Now, they're not going to put it into those terms. Now, what caught my attention, and the reason I bring this up and the reason I think it's important, outside of the very, very simplistic, short-sighted kitchen table type scare tactic economics, is the fact that the top two, especially the Sunshine States, of which I thought Florida was, but not according to them, but the 5 Sunshine States, 2 of them are major gas producers. 2 of them are major gas producers with major revenue coming in. Alaska is the #1 Sunshine State, according to the folks Truth and Accounting. And you go, well, how's that possible? How does Alaska have all of this revenue? In fact, what they said is Alaska has a $46,900 per resident surplus. And I'm thinking, wow, my wife's got a relative who lives in Alaska. The next check he gets is going to be huge. Because as you know, every year the citizens and people who live in Alaska get a check from the state government. It's their portion of the oil revenues. It's their portion of, because it's their land, it's their oil, they should get some of it, right? That's what Alaska does. And you know what? They've got a drilling tax, and they've got a fairly sizable drilling tax. Pretty sizable. One that, I started thinking, maybe Pennsylvania ought to think about it. Instead of, what do they call it? Some kind of weird impact tax. It's not really a severance tax. Maybe if we had a severance tax like Alaska and like, maybe just a thought, like North Dakota, we would have surpluses too, and we could fund education. According to the one website I looked this up on, according to them, Alaska has a 22% drilling tax. North Dakota has an 11% drilling tax. Remember, the guy running for governor on the Democratic side is talking about a 10%, and people are appalled. In fact, there are some who are saying, let's hurry up and rush through a 5%, because we're not even getting that much. So for me, this Truth and Accounting piece of propaganda should really be a tool for us to go, well, the states that you're touting as these great states, they've got major extraction taxes. They're pulling money in from taxes. Why don't we do that? So you've got, these are extraction states. Alaska, North Dakota, Wyoming, Utah, South Dakota, all extraction states. And what's interesting is when you looked at how much money on a federal level that we give back to these states, and this is the part that again grabs my attention and makes me go, we have a serious problem, Houston. These are all states who do marvelously well in getting money back from state governments. The states who are the sinkhole states, of which I know they love to use the sinkhole state frame, but those are the states that pay a whole ton of money in taxes going out. You look at Massachusetts, who gets like 60 cents back from the federal government for every dollar they send to Washington. New Jersey, it's the same thing. Connecticut, who is supposedly the most burdened state in the country, they're one of them who they send more to the federal government than they get back. And where does that money go? It's really interesting that the sinkhole states are the ones who are funding the sunshine states. And it just leaves me scratching my head going, am I missing something? But the biggest part of this, and this is what you need to take from this, the drilling states like Alaska and North Dakota, they're taxing the hell out of their drillers because they know it's not going to be a long time. We got to get the money out of them now to fund our schools and put money away. We're the dumb ones who keep saying, no, we don't want to tax them. No, we don't want to do that. No, we can't do that. It would hurt them. It's idiocy, plain and simple. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Trying to save the world, but never really.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises.
For Workers Independent News, I'm Joanne Powers. Scores of fast food workers and their allies, including U.S. Congresswoman Gwen Moore of Wisconsin, were arrested in civil disobedience actions across the country today as they held strikes and direct action in their fight for better pay for low-wage workers. The Fight for 15 strike was the latest in a series targeting fast food restaurants in over 100 U.S. cities, calling for an increase in hourly wages for workers in the highly profitable industry to $15. Workers were arrested at rallies and sit-ins at McDonald's restaurants ranging from Boston, Philadelphia, and New York to Los Angeles, Las Vegas, and Little Rock, Arkansas. Dunkin' Donuts employee Erica Conception was arrested for taking part in a civil disobedience action in Roslindale, Massachusetts.
I'm fighting because it's the right thing to do. If being arrested has to come with that, then so be it. No questions asked about it. I'll do it again.
In a unanimous decision Thursday, the 7th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals in Chicago ruled that same-sex marriage bans in Wisconsin and Indiana violate the U.S. Constitution. The ruling sets the stage for the two states to join 19 others in the District of Columbia in marriage equality. The decisions come a mere 9 days after attorneys presented oral arguments before the court. The court was skeptical of the reasons given by the states for excluding same-sex couples from the institution of marriage. Marie Carlson was one of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit.
I'm actually still kind of stunned. It took us all by surprise because none of us expected it to come through this quickly. The judges seemed at the hearing like they would not have a problem ruling in our favor, but it's still exciting when you finally get that confirmation. We have 2 kids, we have grandchildren together. For 8 years, we've wanted to get married and make our family legal.
The Indiana case argued that same-sex couples were entitled under the 14th Amendment to due process, the fundamental right to marry, and equal protection under the U.S. Constitution. While the majority of other cases across the nation in the last year found same-sex couples have the fundamental right to marry, Lambda Legal staff attorney Paul Castillo, who represented the plaintiffs in the challenge against Indiana's ban, says today's decision went further.
It evaluated and recognized the harm there are to same-sex couples. That harm is not outweighed by excuses that the state proffers in support of excluding these loving and committed families.
Stays against same-sex marriage remain in effect, as both states will be appealing to the U.S. Supreme Court. If the court takes up the case, it will join those from Utah, Oklahoma, and Virginia currently before them when they return from recess at the end of September.
Workers Independent News is brought to you with support from union-owned and represented Bank of Labor, member FDIC, equal opportunity lender. The Bank of Labor is the bank of choice for unions and their members. Now you can do business with a bank that shares labor values. More info online at bankoflabor.com.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
If I were looking for a good job that lets me build some security for my family, I'd join a union. If I were busting my butt in the service industry and wanted an honest day's pay for an honest day's work, I'd join a union.
You know, and that's exactly what people yesterday were doing across the country in 150 cities across this great country, out in the streets fighting for what is right. Honestly, a fair day's work for a fair day's pay is something that I was taught from a small child on. You go, you give an honest day's work, and you're paid an honest wage. I don't know anyone who is a rational thinker who can look at the minimum wage today and go, oh yeah, that's a reasonable wage. That's a fair wage. There are some crazies and there are some trolls who are trying, but they're generally incoherent and, well, just trying to catch attention. for me, I'm so thrilled to see people out in the streets, and here to talk a little bit about yesterday what happened in Detroit, which I understand a bunch of people were arrested. We've asked the Reverend W.J. Rideout III to come talk with us. He's with Detroit's All God's People Church. He's also involved with the D15 campaign there in Detroit. Reverend Rideout, thanks for taking time for us.
Yes, sir. How are you today? Thank you for having me.
I'm good. You know, I look at this, and I'm excited to see people finally saying we've had enough already and taking to the streets.
Sure, absolutely.
So yesterday you had this great event where there were tons of people out in the street, a number of people arrested. Tell me what you experienced while you were out with them.
I experienced that while we were there, we had so many that were arrested in Detroit, and so many were arrested in Flint. And I mean, we had a peaceful rally, a peaceful demonstration, but yet there were those that were very courageous in taking a stand to get arrested for the cause.
You know, you look at this, and you know, to me, their dignity. Work has dignity, but also a living wage should have dignity as well. And like I said earlier, I don't know that anyone makes a cogent argument that the wages that these fast food workers are paid are a dignified wage.
Absolutely. Some are, if they say that they're dignified wage at the rate of $7.45 or at the rate of $8, then it's not a dignified wage.
Because I don't know how in this country you can exist. I don't know how you put a roof over your head, food on your table, clothes on your back with that. I mean, to be honest.
Absolutely. You cannot, you know, with what they're paying as minimum wage, it is absolutely crazy. Who can survive off of $7.45 an hour or $8.15 an hour? I mean, please keep in mind that people are saying that these are starter jobs, these are high school student jobs, these are college student jobs, when in fact they're not. These are mom and pop jobs. These are people who are trying to survive jobs. In other words, these are survival jobs in this time. The economy's bad. People need help. People have bills to pay.
And the jobs that are left, I mean, you go back and you look at the fact that, the coveted factory jobs that they talk about today that paid a good union wage, those were crummy jobs 100 years ago. And the only way they became good-paying middle-class jobs is they became union jobs.
Sure. Absolutely. I agree that we need unions to help us, and that's what we're standing for even right now, for $15 an hour and for a union. You know, and if we can't have $15 in the unions, we're not going to stop until we get what we need and what we want. And that's just the bottom line, you know. And these people know these corporations are taking advantage of these poor people.
Yeah, we hear an awful lot from the political right about this country being a Christian nation and all of that. And from a faith position, looking at the wages that workers are paid in this country, can you make a cogent faith-based argument on why these wages are somehow the antithesis of being a Christian?
Being a Christian or not, you know, some people want to argue the fact that the people do not need a higher minimum wage, but I clearly beg the difference. They need to come to their senses and understand. First of all, McDonald's is a $200 billion a year money-making industry, and not only them, Burger King and others, and they have mitigated audacity to pay these people slave wages and act like they're doing them a favor, but yet McDonald's comes and tells the people that they hire, even though we're giving you a job, you need to go and sign up for welfare too. That speaks volumes about how this company feels and how it's ran.
Yeah, I mean, I look at this, and it's time right now. And when you look at what you saw yesterday and all of these people out in the street, it's got to give you some measure of hope.
Absolutely. It was 100. It wasn't only in Detroit. It was not only in Flint, Michigan, or Detroit, Michigan, but it was also in 150 cities all across America. So, and there were people arrested all over the world on yesterday. So that ought to be speaking volumes and letting the society and the people know that these people are not playing. Not just Detroit, not just Flint, but California, San Diego, Little Rock, New York, Chicago. All over the world, people are tired and fed up with the slave wage that these companies are paying to the people.
Yeah, and it's time now. Reverend Rideout, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks so much.
Hey, thank you for your time, and God bless you all. Without you all, we cannot get this out.
There you go. Thanks so much. No, you look at this, and what's interesting to me, and we go back through looking at this whole yesterday, which really, honestly and truthfully, I think was an amazing day. You saw so many people coming together, and look, this is one of the things that the corporate class fears the most. They've done really a marvelous job at separating us. They've done a marvelous job of class warfare. And if you don't think so, look at some of the trolls who came out. I got a ton of emails of people who, they just had to go out and give their incoherent rant about why fast food workers aren't worth a raise. And it was really very twisted, and they all followed. And I got to find which think tank came out with which talking points, so that I can mirror them up, because we know that the talking points came from somewhere, because they all hit on them. One, fast food workers never get the orders right. And I'll be honest with you, have I gone through a fast food drive-through and not gotten the right order once in a while? It has happened, but it has happened fairly infrequently. And for those people who are honest about it, you'll go, yeah, it doesn't happen that often. It does happen, but not that often. Not often enough that it's your number one talking point about why people don't deserve an increase in their minimum wage. The other part of this, the other argument that they make is the starter wage. It's that first job. Well, I was just there today. Drove through real quick, and the woman who handed me the bag out the window was probably in her 60s. And that bag was handed to her by a woman who was probably in her 40s. And the other part of this, the one that nobody seems to be talking about, is that this is heavily a woman issue, because the vast majority of the people who work in these places, as far as my experience goes, seem to be women, and women with children. I mean, that's the part that gets me. So as I look at this, there's so much to this. And you go, where'd they get the $15 an hour? I believe they got it from McDonald's. If you remember, they had that little website, preaching to their workers on how to balance their budgets, where you work 40 hours at McDonald's and then you go find a job for 35 hours somewhere else. Which I'm going, wait a second, what happened to living on 40 hours a week? Evidently not in this world. And even they know it. Now, I just read a story not too long ago that said McDonald's is all in favor of it. They're absolutely, because they're the big boy in the room. I mean, they're beyond everybody else. Their profit margins are well beyond anyone else. So for them to pay the $15 an hour would actually, if I were them, I would come out in favor of it. Say, yep, we're going to do it. Let's mandate that so that everybody has to pay it. Because then you will hurt some at the bottom. And this is where the right then has their next talking point. It's going to cost us 500,000 jobs. Which we know that not to be the case. There will be some structural unemployment. There will be. There will be that friction as a few jobs are lost and people find those other jobs. But that happens fairly often anyway. And in fact, some of the studies that I've read actually show an increase in employment. They show that by lower wage workers having more money in their pockets and taxpayers having more money in their pockets from not having to pay the higher taxes to support and subsidize the low wage economy, you actually have more economic activity. And if you have dollars banging around in the economy, you have activity. This isn't rocket science. It doesn't take a genius to figure this out. But those corporatists at the top, what they also understand is it's just not about the minimum wage workers. It's not just about these fast food workers. They fear the rest of the chain popping up. That 60% of the people who have seen their wages decline over the last year, those are the people who would see their wages go up. And look, if you're sitting in the top 3%, collecting your increases year after year after year at the expense of those at the bottom 60%, you don't want things to change. So for those who say, it's redistribution of wealth, you're right. Right now, the redistribution is going from workers to the top, where it should be spread equally across the planet. That's just my thought. Let's take a quick break. Right back with your thoughts. 1-888-520-RICK. 1-888-520-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show. We're working people from the top.
We gotta do it today. No more madness than fury. No more misery. We gotta get over tonight.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
This is your world in two. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, reporting for Talk Radio News Service at the United Nations. North American and European leaders began meeting in Wales today to kick off a major NATO summit. Afghanistan and the Islamic State are both on the agenda, as are future increases in military spending and the situation in Ukraine.
On defense investment, we will turn the corner and reverse the trend of declining defense budgets.
That was NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen, who said he'd like to see NATO members dedicate more of their budgets, or roughly 2% of GDP, to defense expenditure. Across the 28-country alliance, only 4 countries, the United States, the United Kingdom, Greece, and Estonia, meet or exceed that amount, while 8 nations spend 1% or less of GDP on defense. Meanwhile, in Russia, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is warning NATO members against extending membership in the alliance to Ukraine. In remarks published by Russian state media, Lavrov said NATO membership for Ukraine would constitute a national security risk and would be seen as, quote, a blatant attempt to derail all efforts aimed at initiating dialogue on ensuring national reconciliation in Ukraine. In a major act of Russian defiance, France announced that it will not deliver a state-of-the-art helicopter warship that had been built for the Russian Navy. France's plans up until yesterday to fulfill the order of 2 so-called Mistral-class ships had attracted widespread international condemnation amid efforts to isolate the Russian military from cutting-edge technology. There has been talk of NATO acquiring the warships upon their completion, but as of yet, no buyer has been announced. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton.
Talked of how hard it is at the point of war's beginning. But in 1955, the U.S. sent soldiers to Saigon on a classified training mission hidden from the American public. We mentioned the tensions between a radio man and his crew chief, Fitzgibbons. So one hot summer night on the streets of Saigon, the radio man shot and killed his crew chief. It was June 8, 1956. The Pentagon officially set the war at 1962, and veterans on Fitz's mission were just listed as serving in foreign countries. More than 40 years later, after declassification of the mission and a high-level DOD review urged by Fitz's family, when the official beginning of the war was changed to 1955. Finally, on Veterans Day 1998, the name of Richard Fitzgibbon was carved into the Vietnam War Memorial, the earliest date of death on the wall. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
Organizing America 3 hours each night. The Rick Smith Show.
And the radio is in the hands of such a lot of fools trying to anesthetize the way that you feel. Radio is a sound salvation. Radio is cleaning up the nation. So you better listen to the voice of reason. But they don't give you get a choice, cause they think that it's treason. So you had better do as you were told. You better listen to the radio.
1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. The big story yesterday, the federal judge who is presiding over Detroit's bankruptcy has ruled that they're not going to honor a request for an injunction against the Detroit Water and Sewer Department. What does that mean? Well, that means the shutoffs can continue. In fact, what they're saying is now, thanks to this judge denying the request for an injunction, upwards of 6,000 customers will lose their water service. And you look at this, and it's one of those things that just makes you shake your head and go, the area is economically depressed to begin with. One. The area is losing the number of people living in there, and the jobs are going away. And what we're going to do is we're going to continue to drain the area. And for me, water is one of those things that is almost an absolute right. So it's going to be interesting to watch what these folks get away with. Anyway, let's go to the phone line. Let's see what we got. Welcome to the program. What's on your mind?
Rick, it's Andy.
Hey, Andy, how are you?
Yeah, how you doing? I was just watching a video of all those demonstrations yesterday across the country. Man, that's great. People getting out in the street like that sends a message, man.
It's about time.
Yeah, they deserve the $15. There's no question. Those people work darn hard.
And that's the thing that gets me. I mean, you watch some of these trolls who were saying, well, they don't deserve it. I'm going, have you ever done that job? To put up with the flack that they put up with, the horrible conditions, the scarring from the scalding oil. I mean, really.
Rick, I'm like you, man. If they put me behind a counter to take flack from a customer, I'd be throwing stuff at them. I wouldn't be able to do it. I can't take that. I can't take it.
I only throw when someone throws first.
Personality.
Yeah, I mean, and look, it takes a certain kind of person to put up with that, and I'm not one of them.
It sure does. Neither am I. I give them credit for doing that.
But again, the other question of this, Andy, is what value do we put in work, and is work something rewarded? I mean, we hear the right wing talk about, oh, you need to have a skin in the game and you need to get off your behind. So when people do, we're going to cheat them and make them work at poverty wages. What sense does that make?
Well, no question. At headquarters, at McDonald's and all these other fast food, the Burger Kings and the Pizza Huts and the whatnot, this is the business model, to keep those wages low, keep going through people, not really make it into a career sort of thing, which is what they should do to try to uplift these people, but to keep those wages low. And that's what's making the bottom line. When these CEOs are making 12 million, 15 million, 40 million, I think the one guy at McDonald's, a couple CEOs back was making, that's absurd.
Yeah. And the other question is, the other part of this is, you look at the franchisees, the guys who buy these franchises. Are we a society that so values the ownership of these things that they should be making millions of dollars a year for not flipping burgers and not being there? I mean, locally there was a guy who owned several of them who was worth multi-millions of dollars and didn't flip a burger once. But he was sucking all this money out of the wealth that these people were creating. Not only that, abusing the J-1 visa program, bringing in foreign workers and exploiting them as well.
Right. Well, that's the business model. And it's got to change.
But what does it say?
Way out of whack.
What does it say about us, though, as a working class, that we would side with the ownership class and the corporate class over that of other working people?
Well, like you said at the time when it was going on, those foreign workers, those kids, really got a taste of what American capitalism is all about.
That's true.
I mean, they really learned what it was all about. Hey, the reason I really called, although I love this subject, is there was a bill in our legislature called AB 52. They called it the Disclose Act. And a lot of people worked really hard to try to get that bill up and going and to get it passed. And unfortunately, it required a 2/3 majority to pass because of the Proposition 13, because it does have an effect on campaigns and money in the political process. As a matter of fact, I just saw my state senator today, and he was a sponsor of, his name is Jerry Hill. He was a sponsor of this bill, and Public Citizen was strongly behind it, pushing it. There were a lot of grassroots effort. And you ought to look into this, but the reason it failed, that they couldn't get the 2/3 supermajority to pass it, it was close, is because evidently the SEIU and the teachers union didn't want it, because they didn't want to put their name up there displaying that they were behind some campaign ads as well, and to the money they put in, to politics.
Right.
Oh, it really caused a lot of bad taste in a lot of people's mouths to see the SEIU and the teachers union sink this bill.
Yeah, I don't know anything about it, but in what
AB 52, Rick.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now. I'm looking at what it is now, but in my understanding of it, you already know where SEIU spends their monies. All you have to do is look at their LM2s. They have to report all of it. So,
yeah, but you're not going to be looking at that when you see the ad on the TV screen or hear the commercial on the radio.
Yeah,
you're clueless.
No,
because usually they band together. There's a number of groups together that do these ads and so forth.
Well, it's something that I'll most
clearly
certainly
see who's behind it.
It's something that I'll most certainly look into. It's one of those things where I don't have intimate knowledge of it, but I will look into it.
Right. Yeah, it'd be worth looking into what their reasoning is behind it. Because come on, yes, the SEIU and the teachers union and the unions have a lot, but compared to the Koch brothers and the corporate interests in this state or any other state, they're far, far outgunned in the money game. Come on.
I'm absolutely with you. But I will look at it. The best I can do is look at it.
All righty.
Thanks so much, Andy.
Bring that up if you have some contacts here. Let's see what the reasoning was behind this.
I will most certainly look into it. Thanks so much, Andy.
Right.
Appreciate it.
Take care of yourself. Have a great weekend, huh?
You too. And I look at this, and again, back to this, this fast food thing. I remember, back when I was in school, and it took this movement of people to remind me that, because for a while I actually believed that the fast food restaurants were mostly staffed by high school kids or maybe even college kids. But then I remembered back to when I was younger, the guy who was the long-term cook there, who used to give me a ride home, was in his 40s. The cashier who was, she worked, I swore that woman was never gone. She was in her 40s with kids. Just about everybody there, except for the people who were flipping the fries and doing a couple of the other things. Most of the people there that was their life. And there were a couple of us that were high school kids going on to college who, we kind of, fit in different places. But for the most part, that frame of it's, just a hand, that doesn't fly. And the other part of it is, I go back and I was remembering that time period and all of the nonsense that went on and without any voice whatsoever. I remember when, they made me pay for uniforms. I think that's ridiculous. But they got away with it. And it's something that I would consider wage theft. And when we come back, something we're going to talk about, wage theft, and why we need to raise the minimum wage. Quick break. Right back after this.
Smith Show, changing America for the better.
Gross negligence means the company acted with willful or wanton misconducts or reckless indifference.
Accountability for BP in the Gulf oil disaster.
Flames shooting as high as 1,000 feet in the air.
Accountability for PG&E in the deadly California pipeline explosion. California legislature bans plastic bags, regulates groundwater for the first time in history. Plus, celebrating 50 years of protecting America's wild lands and rivers.
All of that accountability and celebration straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Because the whole damn world is swirling down the toilet bowl, which is also full of flames. How both of those are possible, I don't know. I'm going to say fracking.
Yeah, I'll go with that too. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, it's a very busy news week in the non-green world, but I would suggest it's equally as busy this week in the green world.
Oh, yeah, you go away for a couple of days and bam, news volcano. But hey, at least there is some accountability. First up, bad news for BP.
U.S. District Court finding BP grossly negligent in the 2010 Gulf of Mexico Macondo oil spill.
It's been over 4 years since BP's Deepwater Horizon rig exploded, killing 11 men and dumping over 200 million gallons of crude oil into the Gulf over 3 months, the worst oil spill in the nation's history. Now, a finding of gross negligence from the U.S. District Court judge overseeing the BP trial. Now, this is worse than just regular negligence. It's a key legal threshold. It multiplies the potential fines BP could ultimately pay per barrel spilled, meaning that punitive damages could go as high as $18 billion. And that is the next fight in court, determining exactly how much of BP's oil was spilled.
Wow. So I guess we do have to wait for the next court battle, however, because I remember the Exxon Valdez spill. They got dinged with a huge fine, but they were able to go all the way up to the Supreme Court and 20 years later have it reduced down to almost nothing.
Well, it does look like BP is taking a page from that Exxon Valdez playbook. They said in a statement they will appeal the district court's ruling. Now, the judge placed the lion's share of the blame onto BP and cleared BP's partners, Transocean and Halliburton, of gross negligence. Halliburton, which was responsible for the bad cement job that caused the explosion, agreed this week to pay more than $1 billion to settle most of the lawsuits brought by individuals and businesses on the Gulf Coast. And also, not to put too fine a point on it, but if your negligence and reckless disregard killed 11 people, you'd go to prison. In other news, more corporate accountability in California.
Some first thought a plane had crashed into the neighborhood, but it was a gas pipe 3 feet underground that had ruptured and exploded, leaving a crater 30 feet wide with flames spewing out in every direction.
September 10th marks the 4th anniversary of the natural gas pipeline explosion that rocked the Bay Area town of San Bruno. 38 homes were destroyed. 8 people were killed. And now, almost 4 years to the day later, the California Public Utilities Commission has slapped pipeline owner Pacific Gas and Electric with a $1.4 billion fine for negligence that caused the explosion.
We've been talking about these companies getting off the hook with a slap on the wrist, about $1 million. $1.4 billion for PG&E. It sounds pretty substantial.
It does, but it is only half of what the Utility Commission's own staff recommended. Investigators discovered that PG&E had a pattern of negligence and literally thousands of violations on its network of aging pipelines going back for decades. And of course, PG&E has announced late today that they will appeal the fine.
Of course they will.
And just another reminder, if your negligence had killed 8 people, you'd go to jail.
What part of limited liability do you not understand in limited liability corporations?
Corporations are people, my friend.
Yeah, except for that going to jail part.
Also in California, the state assembly has passed a bevy of groundbreaking bills with historic impact. The nation's first ever statewide ban on single-use plastic bags, and most important perhaps, historic new rules to regulate groundwater for the first time ever amid a record and historic drought.
So up until now, farmers farmers across the state have been pumping groundwater for free, no regulations, take as much as you like.
Unlimited, and they're draining the state's aquifers.
And that is now over, assuming that Governor Brown actually signs this legislation?
Yep, that's the first step.
I suspect those farmers will be fighting this law furiously.
Oh yeah, they'll be suing. Finally, this week marks the 50th anniversary of the signing of both the Wilderness Act and the Land and Water Conservation Act, two little-known but powerful conservation programs established by Congress just in time to preserve some of America's most valuable wildlands and rivers. Outdoor recreation on these protected lands generates more than $600 billion a year to the U.S. economy.
Sounds like big government regulation. Let's get rid of that immediately. For much more on all of that and the stories we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Please consider donating to our effort to report the news that matters over your public airwaves. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Oh, baby, it's a wild world. It's hard to get by, just look on the smile. Minimum wage!
You know what it means when they pay you minimum wage? You know what they're trying to tell you is like, hey, if I could pay you less, I would.
Oh boy, if that isn't the truth. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. So as we talked about the other day, you look at the incidence of wage theft, and this Kentucky Labor Cabinet did a really interesting little mock-up where they showed that wage theft was the amount stolen from wages far exceeded the amount stolen in robberies. People breaking into your house or ripping off stores or any of that. Some $2.5 million more. And the number of victims, just through the roof. The number of wage theft victims, 12,264 on average over the last 3 years in Kentucky, as opposed to common theft of just about 1,900 victims. So, and on the wage theft front, those are only the people who came forward. We have no idea how many people actually get ripped off every year by their employer. But here to talk a little bit about that, and also why we need to raise the minimum wage here in Pennsylvania, I've asked attorney Michael Hollander to come talk with us. He's a staff attorney with the Community Legal Services of Philadelphia. Michael, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, thank you for having me on.
So I look at this this mock-up done by the people in Kentucky that highlight the fact that wage theft is a serious problem in their state. Looking at them and us, could we make a corollary kind of a scenario where Pennsylvania is probably in the same boat?
I'm sure we are, Rick. Wage theft is something that we see every day. There's employers, unfortunately, in a lot of different industries where wage theft is very common. In janitorial and construction and restaurants, we see wage theft all the time, unfortunately.
For those who may not know, what do you define as wage theft?
So wage theft is the most simple explanation is wage theft is any time someone's not paid properly, and that can mean a lot of things. That can mean they're not paid the minimum wage; they're paid $5-6 an hour instead of $7.25. It could mean that they're hourly workers; they're working over 40 hours a week and they're not getting paid overtime. It could mean that there's illegal deductions being taken from someone's paycheck. So maybe they showed up late for work and they got docked an hour pay as a penalty, not because they showed up an hour late, but because their employer just says, well, if you're going to show up late, we're going to penalize you for that.
And a number of other things. I mean, unpaid breaks. We've heard stories of people working and then being clocked out for lunch. I know Walmart got themselves into trouble for that. And also the big one, just recently, the Ninth Circuit Court ruled that FedEx in California and in Oregon that they had misclassified their workers as independent contractors and not employees. To me, that's another huge piece of wage theft that we don't often talk about.
That's right. Misclassification is a gigantic problem. Misclassification happens in many industries. It happens in construction and janitorial a lot. But businesses, this is not defined, or this is not restricted just to small businesses. This is, FedEx is doing this. There's businesses all over the place who feel like they can cut costs by saying, hey, everyone who works for us is a contractor, so we don't need to pay workers' comp, we don't need to pay Social Security taxes for these people, we don't need to pay our unemployment taxes for these people. And what happens is the workers get screwed. They don't get their overtime pay. They're not getting workers' comp if they get hurt. They're not getting unemployment if they get laid off. And the states and the cities where they work get hurt also, because there's all sorts of taxes that aren't being paid into the federal government, into the state governments, and the local governments, because these people aren't being classified as employees as they should be.
And in looking at this stuff, what do people do if you think you're a victim of wage theft? I mean, I think about my wife, for instance. When we first met, she was working at a horse stable where they were giving trail rides, and at the end of the ride, they would ask people to give tips for the trail guides. And you throw money in an envelope, and it turns out, I didn't find out till years later, it turns out the company was taking all of those envelopes, pocketing them, and saying, oh, we'll give you a week's vacation throughout the year for all of these tips for the whole year. To me, that's massive wage theft, and that these companies get away with it.
That's right. That is, tip stealing is actually another very common thing that we see in restaurants. And you asked what people should do, and there's several things you can do. You could try to go to the state or the Federal Department of Labor, and they handle some claims. You could also try to find a private attorney. It can be difficult to go through with the case, though, because especially if you're a low-wage worker, if you get paid by the hour, you might have to go into court, or you might have to go in to talk to the Department of Labor, and you lose hours just for trying to prosecute your case from a previous wage theft. And people, if you're still working in the job, people worry they're going to be laid off from the job because they complain that they weren't being paid enough. And even if they're getting some wages stolen, sometimes they feel like some pay is better than no pay, even if it's illegal.
And as I tell my listeners and all of my friends, throughout my entire work career, I can honestly say I have never been a victim of wage theft, because I've always been a union member, and if I had any wage problems, I had a grievance process, so it was all right there. You didn't have to do what you're saying, risk being fired for going after it, or going to an agency that's understaffed. And I look at this report that came out of Kentucky, where in Kentucky they've got 15 wage and hour inspectors for the entire state. That's one person for about 130 employees. Good luck with that.
That's right. And Pennsylvania only has about 20. And it turns out that we're actually doing pretty well compared to a lot of other states. We actually have a large number, which is pretty shocking, because 20 people for the 3 or 4 million working Pennsylvanians is almost nothing. And so you know what that means in terms of enforcement, at least from the State Department of Labor and Industry. They're just strapped and they're not able to do it. And so what that means is that businesses say, hey, if no one's going to prosecute us for this, this is a good business decision for me. I'm not going to pay people properly. No one's going to prosecute me for it, and I'll have a cheaper work environment. And that means that the businesses that are trying to do the right thing, they can't compete. And what happens is we end up lowering the standards for everyone. So even if your employer is not stealing wages from you, if their competitor is, then your employer is going to have to start lowering their wages and their costs and cutting corners somewhere so that they can compete.
Yeah, I've often asked the question. I know when someone steals a candy bar from the local 7-Eleven or wherever, the chances are they're eventually going to go to jail. But if someone's stealing wages from me, how often do they go to jail?
They never go to jail, as far as I know. It actually is a criminal penalty. It's a summary offense in Pennsylvania to steal wages from somebody. But that doesn't mean very much. A summary offense, first of all, means you basically don't go to jail. You pay a fine, and the fine is pretty small in Pennsylvania. And it also has to be prosecuted by the local district attorney, and the district attorneys tend to turn a blind eye to this. They don't want to look at a $500 wage case where someone's having their wages stolen. They say, hey, this is a civil matter. You guys can deal with this on your own. We don't need to deal with it. Now, if somebody steals a 10-cent pack of gum, you could sure they'll be there. They'll give this person a summary offense. They'll prosecute them in court. But if you steal $500,000 of wages from every one of your employees, the district attorneys don't look into that.
And to me, there's something seriously wrong with that.
I agree with you. And so there's, one of the things that we're pushing for, I think you mentioned earlier, I'm part of the coalition of organizations that's working to raise the minimum wage. But as part of that coalition, we're not just looking to raise the minimum wage. We're looking to make enforcement more meaningful. And so there's a number of pieces of that. One of them is we want to make it the criminal penalty more meaningful. So rather than have every time you commit wage theft, it's a summary offense that's never going to be prosecuted. We want to raise that to higher level misdemeanors if you repeatedly commit wage theft. And if we do that, then I think the prosecutors will be more interested in looking at these crimes. They're not so interested in taking their time to waste on a small summary offense. But if they can see a misdemeanor 1 or a misdemeanor 2 from somebody who's stolen wages from lots of employees for lots of money, we might actually start seeing some criminal prosecutions, and then we might see some businesses saying, hey, you know what, we need to pay our employees right.
Yeah, and it's not worth it. And especially when you're talking about minimum wage, we see cases of this where employers are paying less than, as pathetic as the minimum wage is. I've heard stories of people paying less than minimum wage. So there are two fronts here. One, we've got to seriously enforce make sure people are at least paying the minimum wage, and then look at how low the minimum wage is and talk about how we increase this. And I know, as you said, you're part of this Raise the Wage PA. The website they have is raisethewagepa.org. We've got a link at the ricksmithshow.com. Looking at this, they're talking about, I think, what, $10.10 an hour?
$10.10 an hour at least, which is really, if you look at $10.10 an hour, that's historically where the minimum wage has been. It's just been eroded over the last 20 or 30 years as we've let it slip further and further. If you just took the minimum wage from the 60s or 70s and applied the regular cost of living inflation adjustment to it, you would get to $10.10 an hour.
Yeah, I'm more of the mindset that we should be pinning the minimum wage to the increase in productivity. The Wall Street Journal actually came out with a report that said had the minimum wage kept up with productivity, the minimum wage would be like $21 an hour.
Right, and yeah, what we see, and this has been in the newspapers recently too, is that employers are taking more of the money that they make and they're giving it back to the business owners and to the shareholders, and they're giving less of it to their employees. So people are becoming more productive, they're making more money for the businesses, but they're getting paid less and less, and that's a big problem.
Yeah, I mean, we keep hearing this argument that, well, it's a starter wage. I actually heard Gene Barr, the guy from the Pennsylvania Chamber of Commerce, say that a third of minimum wage workers come from households that make more than $75,000 a year, and I'm going, where did you pull that out of?
Right. I don't know where those numbers come from. I mean, what we do know is that something like 83 or 84% of the people who would get an increase in wage if we raise the wage to $10.10 an hour, they're over 20 years old. A quarter of those people who are making the minimum wage are parents with children. Most of the people making minimum wage are women. Most of the people by far making the tip minimum wage, which is a completely separate issue, which is completely abysmal at $2.83 an hour. Those are women. So we're not raising the wage for a bunch of teenagers who are living at home with their rich parents. This is raising the wage for families, for real people living in Pennsylvania, who this is going to help a lot.
And the reality is, as I talked about earlier, the Federal Reserve just came out with a report just this week that pointed out that the bottom 60% of workers in this country saw their wages decline by a fairly substantial amount at a time when those in the top 3% saw a 2% increase in their wages. And with this kind of stagnation of wages, especially at the bottom end, a raise in the minimum wage would raise almost, I would argue, that entire 60% up just a little bit and maybe actually turn that decline around.
Yeah, and we know the Keystone Research Center put out a report where they said that if we raise the wage to $10.10 an hour, we're going to help 1 million workers in Pennsylvania. That's going to raise the wage for 1 million people in Pennsylvania. And if you think about it, when you're raising the wage for the people who are making the least amount of money, the people who are barely above the poverty line, what's going to happen is they're going to take every dime that they make and they're going to spend it. They need to spend it on food, on clothes, on shelter, on all sorts of things. All that money is going right back into the local economy. And so what that's going to do is actually improve the economy in Pennsylvania. So raising the wage isn't just going to help those people, but it's going to help the entire state of Pennsylvania.
But, Michael, don't you know if we raise the minimum wage, it's going to cost us 500,000 jobs? 500,000 people are going to lose their jobs. I've heard that number thrown around in virtually every right-wing circle. Not sure where it comes from, and I'm pretty sure it's not even accurate, but that's what people are being told. We're being feared out of raising the wage.
Yeah, and I'm not an economist, and so I certainly can't speak to, I think that, a number is being misused from a Congressional Budget Office estimate. But I think that it is pretty clear, and I think everyone does agree that if you raise the wage, people are going to spend that money locally, and that money is going to go right back in the economy. If you tell a small business they need to raise their wage, are they gonna stop hiring workers? I don't know. I can't answer that. But I think the $500,000 numbers, the 500,000 people number is a boogeyman.
Yeah, it's meant to scare us. Now, I understand you guys have an event coming up.
We do. There's an event. I believe the date is September 28th. I don't actually have the date in front of me. You might know the date better than I do.
Yeah, it's Monday the 28th.
Yeah, Monday the 28th. There's going to be events all around Pennsylvania rallying to raise the minimum wage and pushing for our principles. And the principles, I think I mentioned some of them, but it's to raise the wage to at least $10.10 an hour, to peg that adjustment to inflation. So in future years, we don't have to come back every 5-10 years and try to raise the wage again. The last time we raised the minimum wage was 2007. Before that, it was in the 90s. Why do we have to come back every 10 years and come through the same fight again? So we want to peg that so that it raises every single year as inflation goes up. We want to get rid of the tip minimum wage. So $2.83 an hour is completely ridiculous. Why do you get paid less because you work in a restaurant and you get paid tips? We want to eliminate something called preemption. And what that is that the state says that if Philadelphia, if Pittsburgh, if one of the cities where it's a bit more expensive to live wants to raise their own minimum wage to say, hey, look, we want our workers to get paid more because the cost of living is higher, we're not allowed to do that right now. Only the state can set the minimum wage. So we want to get rid of that. And then the last thing is we want to strengthen enforcement. Like I was talking about before, we want to stop wage theft, because we could raise the wage to $20 an hour, but if the minimum wage is $20 an hour and no one's enforcing it, then it may as well be $5 an hour, right? Employers are going to do whatever they want.
Yeah. Actually, the event is September 29th, Monday, statewide day of action. You can take a look at raisethewagepa.org for more information on what's going on across the state and where in your neighborhood you can get involved, because I do believe this isn't just about people who are right now making minimum wage. It's about a large swath of the working class. And as you pointed out, that indexing to me is so very important, so that we don't have because there are so far two presidents right now who haven't raised the minimum wage. There's Ronald Reagan and right now President Obama. So now's the time. The other question I have is, any chance we're going to get this done?
I think we will. I think we will get this done. I think that this fall is unlikely. There's just not enough session days because of the election coming up. But I think in the spring we're going to get this done. If you poll people, this is not a Democrat issue. This is not a Republican issue. Almost everybody agrees that we should be raising the minimum wage. Everyone on both sides of the aisle, and people who aren't legislators, the regular people, if you ask them, everyone believes it should happen. So I think it's going to get done. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah, and for me, it's about rewarding work so that that people can support themselves, put a roof over their head, food on the table, clothes on their back, without having to ask government for subsidies, and doing away with this subsidized low-wage economy, and then maybe lowering taxes for everybody. There's an idea. Michael Hollander, I appreciate you taking time for us, filling us in. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Again, the website, raisethewagepa.org, if you want to find out more information about these September 29th events all across the Commonwealth. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Amazing. Some people who've long enjoyed a lifestyle of old money elegance are suddenly trying to downscale their lives and show a bit more of the common touch. They're not corporate chieftains, but they do run multi-million-dollar operations and consider themselves role models for the masses. They are the Catholic bishops of the United States, and it's that role model thing that has them a bit flummoxed. Many are living in grand residences with extensive staffs and personal servants, socializing with the wealthy and political elites, moralizing from elevated pulpits, and, well, generally living in a lofty manner. This has left many of them aloof from the common folk, the very flock they supposedly tend. For years, such privileges for the bishops were accepted as normal, even deserved. Then, last year, Francis happened. Like a hurricane, a new pontiff and a new ethic hit the Catholic hierarchy. Pope Francis lives a Spartan life and goes openly and gladly among the masses, while stressing simplicity and personal humility as the proper demeanor for the clergy. The church's moral emphasis, Francis says, by word and deed, must be on service to the poor and disadvantaged, and the existence of economic inequality must be a top priority, addressed as a social evil. So we now have the phenomena of bishops scrambling to cut extravagances, allocating more resources to the down and out, focusing on economic justice, becoming more available to ordinary parishioners, and, well, appearing more like Francis. Actually, though, they're not aligning their lifestyles and work with the Pope, but with the life and teaching of Jesus, the founder of their church. This is Jim Hightower saying, wow, that's a most impressive conversion. So here's an idea. If Francis can have this effect on the elites of the church, what say we turn him loose on the hubris of Wall Street and the extravagances of the corporate elites?
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's populist take on what the powers that be are up to. Find out more at hightowerlowdown.org.
Would you dive 14 feet deep in the Susquehanna to keep a bridge safe? Would you spend night after night with prisoners to keep your community safe? Would you spend Christmas Eve plowing snow to keep roads safe? AFSCME members do, who choose to serve in public service. Mine inspectors, 911 dispatchers, healthcare workers, parole agents, you may not, but know they're all thinking about you. This message brought to you by AFSCME Council 13.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. So on Wednesday, and this is one of those things, in talking about wage theft, and we've talked on the program about this quite often over the years. But on Wednesday evening, you may remember we had talked with the port truck drivers out on the West Coast about their claims that they've been misclassified, that they've been basically ripped off. They've been charged for fuel, for tolls, for uniforms, for repairs, you name it, they've been charged for it. Well, what they did is they went on strike the other day, and they filed wage and hour claims with the California Division of Labor's Standards Enforcement. So on the 3rd, on Wednesday, at least 33 of these port truck drivers who, like I said, filed this unfair labor claim and filed these charges, they were fired by Total Transportation Services Incorporated because they refused to submit to the company's illegal demands that they withdraw their wage theft claims. So basically it says the boss comes to you and illegally, and this is illegal, comes to you, say, if you don't do this, if you don't withdraw these claims, I'm going to fire you. And what's amazing to me is that this employer thinks that they have the upper hand because they've been getting away with it for so long. Now understand, drivers fired by this company on September 3rd include 4 drivers who just last week were each awarded an average of $68,000 in stolen stolen wages because they were found to be misclassified as independent contractors. So what does this company do? They lose on 4 of them. They don't just double, triple, quadruple. I mean, think about it. 9 times, 9 times. They're mega doubling down, I guess. And now the Teamsters are fighting this as well. Standing up for these people, helping them to file for unemployment claims, because now this is there's something here, and when you do this kind of idiocy, I hope they put this company out of business, and I say that rarely, but this is really a bad actor. These are one of these bad actor companies. And what happens if you allow these bad actors to exist and thrive, what that does for the people who want to participate and play by the rules, it makes them do similar things. It pulls everybody down. So as I look at this, again, somebody's got to, this is why you need to have strong enforcement of the rules, as few rules as we do have. So it's going to be interesting to watch how this plays out. This just happened on Wednesday, so I'm curious what's going to happen, because when you fire at least 33 people, that's got to draw some attention, especially in a situation that's already heated because there was a cooling off period agreed to with the mayor there in Los Angeles. So going to be interesting to see. I'm looking forward to it. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show.
The Rick Smith Show, changing America for the better.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises.
For Workers Independent News, I'm Joanne Powers. Scores of fast food workers and their allies, including U.S. Congresswoman Gwen Moore of Wisconsin, were arrested in civil disobedience actions across the country today as they held strikes and direct action in their fight for better pay for low-wage workers. The Fight for 15 strike was the latest in a series targeting fast food restaurants in over 100 U.S. cities, calling for an increase in hourly wages for workers in the highly profitable industry to $15. Workers were arrested at rallies and sit-ins at McDonald's restaurants ranging from Boston, Philadelphia, and New York to Los Angeles, Las Vegas, and Little Rock, Arkansas. Dunkin' Donuts employee Erica Conception was arrested for taking part in a civil disobedience action in Roslindale, Massachusetts.
I'm fighting because it's the right thing to do. If being arrested has to come with that, then so be it. No questions asked about it. I'll do it again.
In a unanimous decision Thursday, the 7th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals in Chicago ruled that same-sex marriage bans in Wisconsin and Indiana violate the U.S. Constitution. The ruling sets the stage for the two states to join 19 others in the District of Columbia in marriage equality. The decisions come a mere 9 days after attorneys presented oral arguments before the court. The court was skeptical of the reasons given by the states for excluding same-sex couples from the institution of marriage. Marie Carlson was one of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit.
I'm actually still kind of stunned. It took us all by surprise because none of us expected it to come through this quickly. The judges seemed at the hearing like they would not have a problem ruling in our favor, but it's still exciting when you finally get that confirmation. We have 2 kids, we have grandchildren together. For 8 years, we've wanted to get married and make our family legal.
The Indiana case argued that same-sex couples were entitled under the 14th Amendment to due process, the fundamental right to marry, and equal protection under the U.S. Constitution. While the majority of other cases across the nation in the last year found same-sex couples have the fundamental right to marry, Lambda legal staff attorney Paul Castillo, who represented the plaintiffs in the challenge against Indiana's ban, says today's decision went further.
It evaluated and recognized the harm there are to same-sex couples. That harm is not outweighed by excuses that the state proffers in support of excluding these loving and committed families.
Stays against same-sex marriage remain in effect, as both states will be appealing to the U.S. Supreme Court. If the court takes up the case, it will join those from Utah, Oklahoma, and Virginia currently before them when they return from recess at the end of September.
Workers Independent News is brought to you with support from union-owned and represented Bank of Labor, member FDIC, equal opportunity lender. The Bank of Labor is the bank of choice for unions and their members. Now you can do business with a bank that shares labor values. More info online at bankoflabor.com. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Monday morning feels so bad. Everybody seems to connect me. Coming Tuesday, I feel better. Even my old man looks good. It's let's go so slow. Thursday, I don't know. I got money on my mind.
Yes. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. It is our Future Friday. Friday on my mind. Friday all week long. I've been looking for this day. And here to talk a little about what's going on around the world and in their neck of the woods, our good friends at the Campaign for America's Future, ourfuture.org, the website. I got Dave Johnson. Dave, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, I love being on. Hey, that theme song, who's that by? It's a new version.
It's a band called Earthquake. They were minor couple minor hits during the 70s.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That was wonderful. I like that. All right.
So there you go. But it is our Future Friday theme song. So whenever you hear that, you know it's going to be someone from the Campaign for America's Future. I saw the big headline, Dave. The trade deficit is dropping.
Yeah, right. The trade deficit went down a notch to, I think it was $40.5 billion. All right. They had this report yesterday that it's down to $40.5 billion. Okay, $40.5 billion in 1 month of a trade deficit.
Yep.
And we've had trade deficits every month, every year since the 70s.
Right.
Okay. I mean, that's vast. That's huge. And it's unprecedented in the history of the world how far out of balance this is. So we had that report. That was yesterday. And by the way, we hit a record with China.
Yeah, why didn't we see
ever.
that headline? Why didn't we see record trade deficit with China? We only saw it the other way around.
Right. Oh, how good news it is. Okay, well then today we had the jobs report, okay? Now, first of all, the jobs report, 124,000 or something like that.
142.
It's not that bad, okay? I mean, it's not a horrible, terrible thing. It's not. I was hoping for 250,000, or something. But you got to put it in context. When Bush left office, we were losing 850,000 jobs a month.
Right.
Okay, just got to put that in. But it's not a great jobs report. No, it's and here's the really bad thing about it: there were no manufacturing jobs. Zero new manufacturing jobs. Okay, the same number of manufacturing jobs in the economy as last month. I mean, these things go up and down, and this is just noise. But it's not like manufacturing is booming, et cetera, et cetera. Now, here's my point I want to make. So yesterday there was this trade deficit report, and today there's a report that was for the month before, and then for last month we get the jobs report, and there's no manufacturing jobs. And I wonder if you think there might be a connection.
Oh, of course there's a connection, because I keep asking, what if we would have dropped that trade deficit in half? How many jobs would we be creating here? I know everybody's all tied up with the budget deficits and our budget debt. I'm much more concerned about our trade deficit and our trade debt, because as you pointed out, the last time this country had a trade surplus as a country for a year was 1975. Most of the people listening to this program probably weren't even born then.
Right. Now, the people who push the fear about the budget deficit, okay, and don't push the fear about the trade deficit, let me have you think about something. If you get everybody afraid of the budget deficit, then they start demanding a certain kind of solution. And the solutions they demand happen to be really good for the Wall Street types. Okay, they want Wall Street. First of all, every discussion of the budget deficit starts with tax cuts. We've had tax cuts, and we're not going to raise taxes. So the only thing you can do is cut the things that government does to make our lives better, because military is also off the table, right? So they want to keep taxes low. They want to get everybody afraid. They want to get everybody, if you're not getting much good from the government, then you don't like government and you vote against government. Anyway, all right, but here's the other side of it. If you get people thinking about, aware of, and understanding the trade deficit and getting them concerned about the trade deficit, that leads them to push for certain conclusions too. And those conclusions, if they say, hey, the trade deficit's bad, and they say, we got to do something about it, well, the way you do something about the trade deficit is you stop having imports greater than exports. Now, you said, what if we cut the trade deficit in half? I know it's taken a second. But I'm going to make it real clear who this is good for if you do something about the trade deficit. $40 billion last month, 40.5. What would happen in America if suddenly we got $40.5 billion worth of orders in a month to factories and companies that produce things or services, etc., in the United States. $40.5 billion of orders, new orders, out of nowhere. And then next month, another $40.5 billion. And then the next month, another 40. All right. What would happen to our economy? What would happen to jobs? What would happen to factories? Think about the factories that would be opening up. Think about the hiring they'd be doing. Wages would be forced up as companies compete to get people to come work there, because we got another $40 billion this month that we got to make. If you get people thinking about the trade deficit, that's really good for people who work in the United States. Now, it means if we were to balance trade, stop importing all of this stuff, it means that Wall Street would be, ultimately, of course, the profits would be higher, but in the short term, they're playing this game of a lot of unemployed people, so you're begging for work, so you take anything they give you at any price. You don't complain. You don't ask for a raise. Corporate profits are up because our wages have not gone up.
Exactly.
Exactly. So if you get people scared of the budget deficit, oh, God, I got to cut back. We all got to cut back. But if you get people scared of the trade deficit, all of a sudden they'll ask us to do things that create jobs in the United States.
Yeah, and
that raise wages.
But the other part of that argument too, as well, is if you're focused on the budget deficits, you're focusing on government, and government's bad because that's the narrative that they keep preaching. If you start talking about the trade deficits, then you've got to look at corporate America, and they don't want you looking at corporate America because the narrative is government bad, corporate America good.
So. And also, a lot of the reason we have this huge budget deficit is because of the trade deficit. The fact that we've got to borrow all this money to buy this stuff. The fact that we've lost all of these jobs, they're not paying taxes. You know, it's just this vicious circle of what we've been doing since the late 70s, of this free market stuff where, oh, it's bad to complain about, you know, they call it protectionism. Right, we're protecting our jobs and we're protecting democracy. They say, but you see, wait a minute, in a democracy, people want good wages and they pass all these laws, like minimum wage laws. They pass all these environmental laws. They pass regulations protecting people. That's what democracy does. You hear these guys complain. They're complaining about regulations, wages, you know, and the environment and stuff. So they're saying, let's move all these jobs to China, where they're not a democracy, so they don't have the costs associated with these laws that democracies pass. Basically, they're saying, let's get these jobs outside of the borders of democracy so that we, the people, can't say what we want.
Yeah.
It's really a war on democracy.
I absolutely agree. And the other part of this, though, is while you lose those manufacturing jobs, we're left with the Reagan dream. And, you know, and I like to blame everything on Reagan because I think virtually everything was blamable on that era. And he was the guy who really pushed us in that, not just pushed us, but really full tilt boogie toward this neoliberal policy of, you know, move everything out of the country, move all manufacturing out, and we'll be this grand service-based economy. So what we're left with are lower paying jobs in these service-based industries, like fast food, like retail, and they pay crummy wages.
Right, and they'd say, well, we're developing markets over there. No, China's not buying from us. That's why we have a $30 billion trade deficit in 1 month, record high with China. They're not buying back. This isn't a game where we're helping lift them up so they buy from us. Obviously, they're not buying from us. They're playing a different game of strategic power struggle with us. They're elevating their strategic interests, building their military, etc., with this money. They're not buying from us. We have to balance the trade. There's no reason to call it trade if we've got these huge trade deficits every year after every year. It's not trade if they're not buying back from us.
Well, it's not trade anyway. It's not trade anyway, Dave. When you have what used to be American companies, and you can name, you know, go down the list of any of them. You know, Sunbeam, GE, whatever. They used to be American companies. Burger King, for instance, they used to be American companies. They make their products overseas. They bring them back, and they can call that trade. That's not trade. That's me buying a product that used to be an American-made product. It's just made somewhere else now.
Right.
We didn't trade for it. Maybe the only thing we traded were our livelihoods and our standard of living for crummier and crummier products.
Economists will tell you that that one of the benefits of trade is you go somewhere where they have what they call a comparative advantage.
Right.
For example, they grow bananas better in Central America than they do here. They have a comparative advantage. But when you just close a factory, because the comparative advantage is they don't have a democracy, so they don't have environmental laws. That's what they're calling the comparative advantage of places like China and Vietnam, where they open the factories up there. Their companies are getting around the borders of our democracy, and it's the democracy that made us so prosperous in the first place, by the way.
Yeah.
So there's an association between yesterday's trade deficit numbers and today's numbers about the bad manufacturing growth. Zero manufacturing job growth. It's worse than that, though. I mean, as we lose these factories, a factory closes down, there's a cost, but think of the immense cost of bringing it back, because you don't just lose the factory. You lose the suppliers. You lose the maintenance. You lose, even more important, you lose the people who know how to operate the factory.
Right. You have a
who
major
know how
brain
to
drain.
make this stuff. So the investment in starting over is vastly, vastly, vastly higher than the profit made when you sell it off to China, basically.
Yeah, and not just that, the know-how, but also the tinkering that used to go on. I mean, a lot of things that we have now are because people went home and they tinkered with what they did at work. They took it home and they figured out how to do something maybe a little bit better, maybe something completely different. And I go back and I remember a friend of mine, former Congressman Phil Hare, worked in a clothing factory. And he said, the sewing machine, the huge industrial sewing machines that they used at the time, someone developed the idea that, hey, we could use these machines, just retrofit them a little differently to put those chips together for computers. Who would have thought of that? Guy tinkering in his garage figured this out.
Right. So as we lose this knowledge, and we lose, basically for a long time, we were kind of tricked, and they said, this is good because we're going to convert to a knowledge economy. Let them make it cheaper because that helps everybody here because then we buy stuff cheaper, etc. But it's gone on long enough now that enough people are looking around and seeing what actually happened. And that is that, okay, so maybe more money does come into the United States, but it's not shared. It's not going to the people who had those jobs by any means. The people who had those jobs aren't going into a knowledge economy, and in fact, the knowledge economy isn't paying off very well for a whole lot of people. I live in Silicon Valley, and there's some people that make a lot of money, but look across the economy at the stagnant wages and just drive around and look at the buildings falling down and the roads getting worse. So people are finally seeing that, wait a minute, this whole argument they had that, well, what we're all going to do now is we're all going to go to college and get advanced degrees and work in a knowledge economy. All these things they said about what will replace these good jobs and everything
haven't come to fruition. And
they haven't come to the country either. A few people got really rich, and everybody's starting to kind of see it now. And if you look at the poll numbers, people are seeing what these trade agreements did.
Well, it's about time. It's about time. I mean, the Federal Reserve just came out with a report this week that the bottom 60% of workers in this country saw their wages decline over the last 3 years.
That's right. They also showed how the top, it's not the 1%, it's actually the top 3%. Yep. Yeah, that study showed how it's all really just concentrating to a few people at the top because we don't share. Sure, the economy might have more money coming in. We've just had the longest stretch of private job creation, all of these things, but who's benefiting? Nobody's getting raises, etc.
Yeah.
So people are starting to understand that we got tricked in the late 70s and especially in the 80s. They pumped literally billions of dollars into these campaigns to convince us that this was the right way to go. There are all these things they convince us of. People, by and large, now see what's going on. But what are we going to do about it? Here's the problem. If you got a job and your job's replaced by a machine, the person that owns the machine gets all the money you used to make, and you're out. And that can't even work long term for any economy because eventually one guy's going to have all the money, and it's going to be a guy, of course. One guy's going to have all the money. Literally, because that's the only way this can go. And this new book by this guy, Thomas Piketty, about capitalism, and he showed with math, with the equations, with the history of what happens. There's only one direction that it can go. One person's going to end up with all the money, and the rest of us are going to be saying, yes, sir. Would you like a martini now, sir?
Yeah, we're going to end up with an economy where a handful of people have all the money and the rest of us will clean up after them. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah,
so the question is how do we change that?
Well,
and I look at what happened yesterday where you had, thousands of people across the country in 150 cities out in the streets demanding better wages. Is that the direction? Is it legislative? What's the answer?
There's a joke. And I know I'm going on a tangent. There's a little joke. They're asking for $15 an hour, right?
Yep.
But if the minimum wage worker of 1968 had gained as the economy gained, all right? I mean, like I said, there is more money coming into the economy. The economy is more efficient. The country is wealthier. If we had shared those gains at the rate we were sharing before the late 70s, that whole thing that hit, the minimum wage would be $16.50 an hour now. So that change where the person who gets laid off loses everything and the person who owns the machine that replaced that person gets everything, there's the nature of the problem of our economy, is that if a few people get all the benefits, economists will tell you that all this stuff trade is good because the economy grows and the country at large gets more money. But the point was we're all supposed to benefit. We're all supposed to gain from the economy. So that's the root problem. Now, some people are talking about, well, what if we had a minimum guaranteed income? And I've been saying, well, what if somebody gets laid off, replaced by a machine? What if we put a tax on that? From then on, 70%, I don't know, of the wages that person got go into a pool, and the person who replaced him with a machine still gets 30%. I mean, that's a huge gain.
Yep.
But
no, I've talked about that as well. I think we do need to have, and I think it was Milton Friedman who actually made that concept popular with the negative tax that he came up with back in the 70s, and eventually turned into the earned income tax credit during the Reagan years.
Yeah. What if that money that is gained when you lay someone off goes into a pool towards a minimum guaranteed income, so that you not only have a minimum guaranteed income, but as more and more gains come into the economy and more people get replaced, that minimum income actually goes up. See, they do that in Alaska, by the way. Everybody in the state gets money from the oil fund of Alaska. So it's not the kind of idea that's crazy in our own system.
You mean one of the sunshine states, according to the people over at Truth in Accounting? Because according to them, every citizen in Alaska has a $46,500 windfall coming to them from their state because they're a sunshine state.
I don't know what's a sunshine state.
I'll have to send you the report. It's hysterical.
Okay.
But you're absolutely right. I mean, the people of the state share in the wealth that they create, and it's something that we've got to really talk about.
The problem that we're talking about, where the economy actually keeps growing, and you and me actually aren't getting raises. And in fact, a lot of people are looking for work, and a lot of people are, they're in these situations where they got to work these part-time jobs, or they're misclassified, all these things that are going on, all these shenanigans. It's because the core nature of our system has a flaw in it, and that is that it concentrates wealth in a few hands, and it's not accounting for that. It used to account for that. There used to be strong unions that would force these companies to pay more, but they used the trade laws to break the unions because they could say, look, all right, you don't think you want to get paid more? All right, we'll just close this factory and move to China, and then, so you better shut up. I mean, everybody feels it. Everybody in the economy feels it. Americans don't take vacations hardly anymore.
Yeah.
You've probably been reading that one.
Sure.
Because they're afraid.
And employers don't offer it anymore. So because we don't have the ability to demand. And again, I go back to what happened yesterday. To me, that's the key. The working people of this country, the bottom 60% of people who haven't seen a raise and have actually seen their wages go backward, they've got to go to the streets, as they did during the Depression, where they were literally ripping this country apart brick by brick, demanding their political leaders to do something. To me, it's an absolute disgrace that this this president ran on a platform of passing the pathetic piece of nonsense known as the Employee Free Choice Act, a bill that was so watered down they thought Bush would sign it, and that hasn't happened. To me,
Rick,
that's disgraceful.
Rick, usually you get me on the show and I start shouting, but I got you. What we call our dogs. I got you wound up, didn't I?
Yeah, well, it's one of those things that just irritates me.
Yeah,
because
that's right.
I truly believe a lot of these problems could be alleviated by having stronger unions, by having workers be able to negotiate for the wealth that they create. There's so much of this,
and that could be traced right to those trade laws, and that's traced to that trade deficit yesterday, and then the no manufacturing new jobs today in the employment report. $40.5 billion trade deficit in 1 month.
Yeah.
Picture $40.5 billion of orders coming into American companies that do things or make things here in 1 month. $40.5 billion. And the suppliers, that would be booming as the factories opened, and the grocery stores around those factories, and the shoe stores, and how many car sales would go up? $40.5 billion in orders. And then the next month, another $40.5 billion in orders.
Yeah.
You think the stimulus did something, and it did. It turned us from losing 850,000 jobs a month up to gaining jobs every month. You think that did? Well, look at what $40.5 billion more dollars. Remember, the $40.5 billion this month, and then again next month, and then again the month after that. Every single $40.5 billion hiring more people. That's the trade deficit, and that's what those trade deals have done. NAFTA, but then the China entry, that 5 million jobs and more than 50,000 factories closed after China joined into the World Trade Organization. Right. Okay.
So let me ask you last question then. Last question I've got for you then. In looking at this and focusing on the trade deficits, South Korea, we were told the chorus of the South Korean Free Trade Agreement was supposed to bring us jobs.
Right.
Any idea what the trade numbers were with them last month?
Our trade deficit has gone way up with Korea. We've already lost. I don't know the exact numbers, but it has done the opposite of what they promised. And not only that, you heard about the tubular goods, the oil country tubular goods, okay, that hit the steel companies, okay? You hear about this oil boom. Well, they have to buy a lot of specialized kinds of steel pipe for the oil country exploration and drilling, okay? It's a lot of pipe, and the pipe to bring the oil in, and all those things. Well, Korea dumped. Dump means sold it at below cost to take over our market, okay? And they did that. You can't blame the oil companies for buying when it's a lot cheaper coming out of Korea. As soon as we opened up that free trade agreement, Korea starts dumping the stuff on us because, they're not selling enough out of their steel plants. We were closing steel plants, okay? So we finally got a trade ruling on it that they were dumping, selling below cost, and it's starting to maybe clear up, but they already did a lot of damage, okay? So there's just one example of what that Korea deal did, Now they're pushing the big ones, okay? The Trans-Pacific Partnership, they're pushing one with Europe. Europe's actually going to use us for cheap labor. They're pushing another one called something investment agreement. All right. The answer is to call your members of Congress and say, hold off on these trade deals. They're not working. Don't get fooled. And your senator, okay, your senators and your member of Congress, call them up, call their office and say, you're paying attention to these trade agreements. Trade agreements are really important to you. They're the things that are doing this to our economy.
There you go. That's the answer. Or at least part of it, the start of it.
Yeah.
Dave, it's always great talking with you. I appreciate you taking time for us on this Our Future Friday. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me on, Rick. Great talking to you.
You too as well, Dave Johnson. He is a fellow over at the Campaign for America's Future, ourfuture.org, the website. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
As long as we can live in harmony.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
This is your world in 2. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, reporting for Talk Radio News Service at the United Nations. North American and European leaders began meeting in Wales today to kick off a major NATO summit. Afghanistan and the Islamic State are both on the agenda, as are future increases in military spending and the situation in Ukraine.
On defense investment, we will turn the corner and reverse the trend of declining defense budgets.
That was NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen, who said he'd like to see NATO members dedicate more of their budgets, or roughly 2% of GDP, to defense expenditure. Across the 28-country alliance, only 4 countries, the United States, the United Kingdom, Greece, and Estonia, meet or exceed that amount, while 8 nations spend 1% or less of GDP on defense. Meanwhile, in Russia, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is warning NATO members against extending membership in the alliance to Ukraine. In remarks published by Russian state media, Lavrov said NATO membership for Ukraine would constitute a national security risk and would be seen as, quote, a blatant attempt to derail all efforts aimed at initiating dialogue on ensuring national reconciliation in Ukraine. In a major act of Russian defiance, France announced that it will not deliver a state-of-the-art helicopter warship that had been built for the Russian Navy. France's plans up until yesterday to fulfill the order of 2 so-called Mistral-class ships had attracted widespread international condemnation amid efforts to isolate the Russian military from cutting-edge technology. There has been talk of NATO acquiring the warships upon their completion, but as of yet, no buyer has been announced. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've talked of how hard it is to pinpoint a war's beginning, but in 1955, the U.S. sent soldiers to Saigon on a classified training mission hidden from the American public. We mentioned the tensions between a radio man and his crew chief, Fitzgibbons. So one hot summer night on the streets of Saigon, the radio man shot and killed his crew chief. It was June 8, 1956. The Pentagon officially set the beginning of the war at 1962, and veterans on Fitz's mission were just listed as serving in foreign countries. Until more than 40 years later, after declassification of the mission and a high-level DoD review urged by Fitz's family, when the official beginning of the war was changed to 1955. Finally, on Veterans Day 1998, the name of Richard Fitzgibbon was carved into the Vietnam War Memorial, the earliest date of death on the wall. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
The most important issues of the day. This is The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. George Orwell must be kind of doing that spinning thing in the grave, going, no, that's my idea. Thieves stole my idea, you did. Because you remember 1984, perpetual war with someone all the time. Well, evidently, we've got a congressman, a guy named Frank Wolf, the Republican from Virginia, who basically is going to be putting forth a piece of legislation that we can have war everywhere and all the time. Evidently, the 2001 authorization for the use of military force, you know, what we gave Bush to be able to go wherever and pretty much carte blanche to, start his war on terror. That's not enough. That's not enough, and now we're going to expand that. He wants to pursue the Authorization for Use of Military Force Against International Terrorism Act. That would basically expand what we've already handed over and expand the AUMF to go wherever, whenever, and however, without really any much oversight from them, with no expiration date. That's fantastic. Anyway, here to man, just frustrating, nuts. Anyway, here to talk about maybe a little bit of that and what's going on around the world. Luke Vargas, Talk Radio News Service. Luke, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, good evening. I doubt some of the news I'm going to read you is going to clarify your anxiety over things like the War Powers Authorization Act or anything like that, particularly with the news today that at the sidelines of the NATO summit in Wales, the president, with the assistance of John Kerry, has cobbled together what they're calling a core alliance, essentially, of countries that are willing to contribute to operations against the Islamic State. It's kind of funny. We know that countries, we hear a little bit about what some of them are willing to contribute. For example, of these 10 countries, France has said they're willing to participate in airstrikes, which is something they assisted with, if you remember, back in the Libya campaign. But again, we don't know the extent of the mission. The president was quite cryptic, really, when it came to exactly what the scope of operations would be. He said, this is a threat that could have implications in Syria as well. Implications in Syria, that's one of the biggest ways of talking around exactly what's going to be happening here. So again, we've got a coalition. We've got people who are willing, in some cases, to provide planes to this. We don't know about boots on the ground if it goes that deep. But we do have 10 countries now at this point that are willing to go along with the U.S.
And, to me, I keep looking at the news reports. I keep seeing all of this stuff around me. The media seem to be hyping up this idea that war is a-coming with somebody, at least somewhere.
Can you hear me? I thought the line might have dropped.
No, I mean, it's just I look at this stuff and it's frustrating because it looks like all arrows are pointing towards we're going to be bombing stuff and we're going to be knee deep in this stuff again.
Well, look, there's no doubting the fact that over the past few days the media has been hyping that up, but at the same time, the very words from world leaders have also made a marked shift. I know a few weeks ago it was kind of frustrating for me to listen to a lot of American politicians saying that we need to be sort of critical of the president's strategy because we're not destroying ISIS quite yet. And I said, look, the president has said nothing along those lines. Up until very recently, the Pentagon has only been saying that our campaign there is aimed at containing the group. There was never an objective that was authorized by the White House to go and actually dismantle ISIS. That's changed. The president's saying today the goal now is to hunt down and dismantle the organization. So, yes, the media may be involved in sort of getting this ball rolling a little bit faster than it ought to, but at the same time, they're not doing so without the kind of words from world leaders that would allow them to make the kind of claims that we are beginning something that looks a lot like a war. So the rhetoric really has shifted.
And I understand there's a ceasefire deal in Ukraine?
Yes. Reasons to be skeptical here. I've looked at this agreement that was agreed between the Ukrainian army and pro-Russian rebels today in Belarus. A lot of these points of the ceasefire deal are major red flags in my eyes. One of them is that these rebels are going to vacate some of the cities that they fought, with tremendous casualties and losses to try to maintain a hold. And these are the eastern cities of Donetsk and Luhansk. They say they're going to vacate them, but at the same time, according to the ceasefire, they say they're going to vacate them. But if you look at the statements from these rebel groups, they've taken to the media this evening, one of them telling Russian media that the ceasefire does not mean the end of our policy to split from Ukraine. You can't really reconcile these things. So there are a lot of reasons to think the ceasefire could collapse pretty quickly. I mean, it's been about 7 hours since it went into effect, and there does seem to have been a slight reduction in the amount of fighting. But at the same time, you look at the retreat from the cities not really seeming viable if you want to capture the region. And then you look at also this pledge from the rebels to create these humanitarian corridors. There have been a lot of reports over the past few days about the fact that near the city of Mariupol, that the Ukrainian army was going to go into retreat. They were accompanied by a large civilian population. They said, look, we need a humanitarian corridor to get out of here to help evacuate people. The rebels said, look, we'll abide by that. We'll let you leave. And then there were reports of sort of a massacre, a really horrible scene where they were boxed in on all sides. The rebel forces started firing on them. There were quite significant casualties. You hear a promise in this ceasefire to abide by humanitarian corridors, and you look at recent history and you see no willingness to comply with those. So I see more potholes here than I see opportunities for a lasting end to the fighting here. I'm certainly not confident about this. And you look at the NATO conference again, where NATO says they're going to try and authorize these sort of spearhead forces to be capable of deploying anywhere along the eastern frontier of the NATO, sort of area. They also say they want to increase potentially lethal aid to the Ukrainian army. I don't see those things being a setup to a peace here. I think it's just a pause before retrenching and perhaps even redoubling efforts to try to push back these rebels.
Yeah, and I look at this, and I understand the NATO leaders are pledging to up the defense spending.
Yeah, so essentially you've got 28 countries in NATO. Only 4 of them dedicate 2% of GDP or more towards defense. The U.S. is substantially higher. I wish I had the number in front of me, but I could probably pull it up. Whereas 8 countries of the 28 spend below 1% of GDP on defense spending. Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the Secretary General of NATO, said one of the top priorities for this NATO meeting, and it was accomplished almost as soon as it began, was that all these countries pledged to, within the next decade, obviously we've got a long-term horizon here, to get their military spending up over 2%. That's going to require a tremendous amount of moving around of resources. You're going to have countries that are kicking and screaming about every funding project or existing expenditure already after the recession downturn in Europe. I don't know how some of these governments are going to be able to ram through, in some cases, doubling or tripling defense spending, even across 10 years. But it is a plan, and it shows that NATO leaders really feel that Europe is not protected enough, that the armies that have sort of been scaled back over the past few years, and in some cases decades, just are no longer enough to be able to protect the continent, Europe and North America, from these crises that we're facing today. So we'll see how the implementation goes, but a pretty universal commitment from these leaders to try and get that figure up, that maybe it was wrong to draw down their military forces so much. And I'm sure you probably disagree with the notion that that's the way of solving anything, but it does seem to be what these leaders think.
Well, I mean, after the fall of the Soviet Union, a lot of countries thought the Cold War is over. I mean, we did as well. I mean, George H.W. Bush cut spending for defense dramatically because we thought we won, and we didn't have to have such a huge investment in military. And I think a lot of other countries did that as well, and also then saw us taking the role as the world's cop and the world's enforcement, and they continued to scale back.
Well, I mean, you look at the fact that the U.S. is the one wrangling together NATO leaders to take the fight to the Islamic State, and you definitely see kind of a diversion from the president's strategy up until this point to try and hold off as long as heavenly possible to creating these types of military campaigns. We've seen a reversion to that more aggressive, assertive U.S. foreign policy role, at least as he tries to take the fight to the Islamic State here. So things are changing, whether at the White House or in the halls of NATO power.
I also understand there's a big victory for the U.S. In the fight against terror in Somalia. Tell me what's going on there.
Yeah, this is, some people would say the B leagues of terrorism. These are not terrorist groups that are hell-bent on, destroying targets within the United States, but Al-Shabaab, the Al-Qaeda-affiliated terrorist group that operates predominantly in Somalia, but also in Kenya, and was responsible, I'm sure your listeners know, for that horrible attack on the Westgate shopping mall in Nairobi, Kenya last year. It killed about 65 civilians and really was quite horrifying. Their leader, Ahmed Abdi Godani, was killed in a U.S. airstrike on Monday. This was a pretty big move by the United States. We have used special forces to conduct certain operations in Somalia over the past few years. Here we use apparently both manned aircraft as well as unmanned drones, equipped with Hellfire missiles, to just unload all hell on this guy. And it took a few days for us to pick through the rubble. I guess maybe you can't even pick through the rubble of a Hellfire missile strike. but we must have been listening in on the chatter of the people we know affiliated with this group, and we have confirmed today that the leader of this group has been taken out. It is expected that because of the way this group operates, the way its structure is set up, that this is a pretty big defeat. There are some groups where if you take out the leader or hit the head of the snake, that it doesn't have much of an impact. It is believed, thankfully, that when you're dealing with Al-Shabaab, that it is a little bit more consequential when you kill their leader. Don't ask me why exactly. This is not a group I'm terribly familiar with. But in all regards, a good victory in a regional crisis. And we hope that it could potentially pave the way for the establishment of something looking like a serious government in Somalia, which they've been lacking for many years now.
There you go. And finally, the Dalai Lama. What's going on with him?
Well, I just talked about this in the podcast for today, our World News podcast. The Dalai Lama was scheduled to go to Cape Town, South Africa, next month for a meeting of Nobel Peace Prize laureates. It's a pretty distinguished group of folks. It's being chaired by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I know F.W. Leclerc is going to be there, as well as many other living Nobel Prize laureates like Lech Walesa. They're going there to honor the contributions to global peace of Nelson Mandela. And the South African government, for the third time in 5 years, rejected his visa to come there. A lot of people said, right immediately that this was because of South Africa having its largest trading partner be China. China, not so subtly, has been pressuring its growing roster of economic partners to just deny access outright for the Dalai Lama to visit their countries. It's not because they even really view him to be so much of a risk anymore. It's that it's a metric, a barometer of the loyalty of their, growing list of partners around the world to toe Beijing's line. And here the South African government, not even factoring in the horrible optics here. I mean, you're preventing the Dalai Lama from coming to honor the country's sort of civil rights, human rights hero. He's not going to be able to go. China today applauded that decision, said it's right to exclude him. Again, it raises some big questions. A lot of experts I talked to and interviewed this morning said this is not just we need to really take this story quite seriously. The Dalai Lama doesn't get a lot of press anymore, but this is big. If more and more countries around the world are willing to commit to towing Beijing's line on denying the Dalai Lama entry, what else are they going to do? This sort of is what the head of the Tibetan Studies program at Columbia said is the very, very narrow tip of a much larger wedge, which shows that Chinese money has been able to buy over the politicians of a lot of countries, and that could have pretty major consequences down the line, a lot more severe than whether the Dalai Lama can give a speech or not.
And guess where he got the money? Guess where China got the money? From us. From us. I
wanted to let you make the connection.
A $30.5 billion trade deficit last month. We're on pace to have the largest trade deficit with China in history. Every month we're $30 billion trade deficit. That's where they're getting the money from.
Well, thankfully the U.S. is one of the few countries that has, at almost every occasion possible, pushed back against these Chinese threats that they're going to really change policy towards anyone that wants to let the Dalai Lama come and speak. There was sort of a scandal where he had to exit the White House a few years ago through a service door and a bunch of piles of trash and stuff. But he was invited back 2 times after that, and it sort of proves that China doesn't necessarily actually, use the knife against people that don't comply with its orders. But there is this perceived fear that if you break rank, if you're South Africa and you decide to let the Dalai Lama in, that you're going to lose out on all these trade benefits. Maybe some of the people in these countries aren't so fond of those deals. The extraction of mineral resources and the true wealth of many African countries are being entirely gobbled up by China for the benefit of very few people in these countries.
Yeah.
But they are afraid of that risk that investment could leave, and that's why you're seeing countries, I believe, like South Africa, just going along with Beijing here. It's kind of upsetting.
There you go. Luke Vargas, always appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Cheers. Have a great weekend.
All righty, you too. Let's take a quick break. Right back to wrap things up. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
Gross negligence means a company acted with willful or wanton misconduct or reckless indifference.
Accountability for BP in the Gulf oil disaster.
Flames shooting as high as 1,000 feet in the air.
Accountability for PG&E in the deadly California pipeline explosion. California legislature bans plastic bags, regulates groundwater for the first time in history. Plus, celebrating 50 years of protecting America's wild lands and rivers.
All of that accountability and celebration straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Because the whole damn world is swirling down the toilet bowl, which is also full of flames. How both of those are possible, I don't know. I'm going to say fracking.
Yeah, I'll go with that too. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, it's a very busy news week in the non-green world, but I would suggest it's equally as busy this week in the green world.
Oh, yeah, you go away for a couple of days and bam, news volcano. But hey, at least there is some accountability. First up, bad news for BP.
U.S. District Court finding BP grossly negligent in the 2010 Gulf of Mexico Macondo oil spill.
It's been over 4 years since BP's Deepwater Horizon rig exploded, killing 11 men and dumping over 200 million gallons of crude oil into the Gulf over 3 months, the worst oil spill in the nation's history. Now, a finding of gross negligence from the U.S. District Court judge overseeing the BP trial. Now, this is worse than just regular negligence. It's a key legal threshold. It multiplies the potential fines BP could ultimately pay per barrel spilled, meaning that punitive damages could go as high as $18 billion. And that is the next fight in court, determining exactly how much of BP's oil was spilled.
Wow. So I guess we do have to wait for the next court battle, however, because I remember the Exxon Valdez spill. They got dinged with a huge fine, but they were able to go all the way up to the Supreme Court and 20 years later have it reduced down to almost nothing.
Well, it does look like BP is taking a page from that Exxon Valdez playbook. They said in a statement they will appeal the district court's ruling. Now, the judge placed the lion's share of the blame onto BP and cleared BP's partners, Transocean and Halliburton, of gross negligence. Halliburton, which was responsible for the bad cement job that caused the explosion, agreed this week to pay more than $1 billion to settle most of the lawsuits brought by individuals and businesses on the Gulf Coast. And also, not to put too fine a point on it, but if your negligence and reckless disregard killed 11 people, you'd go to prison. In other news, more corporate accountability in California.
Some first thought a plane had crashed into the neighborhood, but it was a gas pipe 3 feet underground that had ruptured and exploded, leaving a crater 30 feet wide with flames spewing out in every direction.
September 10th marks the 4th anniversary of the natural gas pipeline explosion that rocked the Bay Area town of San Bruno. 38 homes were destroyed. 8 people were killed. And now, almost 4 years to the day later, the California Public Utilities Commission has slapped pipeline owner Pacific Gas and Electric with a $1.4 billion fine for negligence that caused the explosion.
We've been talking about these companies getting off the hook with a slap on the wrist, about $1 million. $1.4 billion for PG&E. It sounds pretty substantial.
It does, but it is only half of what the Utility Commission's own staff recommended. Investigators discovered that PG&E had a pattern of negligence and literally thousands of violations on its network of aging pipelines going back for decades. And of course, PG&E has announced late today that they will appeal the fine.
Of course they will.
And just another reminder, if your negligence had killed 8 people, you'd go to jail.
What part of limited liability do you not understand in limited liability corporations?
Corporations are people, my friend.
Yeah, except for that going to jail part.
Also in California, the state assembly has passed a bevy of groundbreaking bills with historic impact. The nation's first ever statewide ban on single-use plastic bags, and most important perhaps, historic new rules to regulate groundwater for the first time ever amid a record and historic drought.
So up until now, farmers across the state have been pumping groundwater for free, no regulations, take as much as you like.
Unlimited, and they're draining the state's aquifers.
And that is now over, assuming that Governor Brown actually signs this legislation?
Yep, that's the first step.
I suspect those farmers will be fighting this law furiously.
Oh yeah, they'll be suing. Finally, this week marks the 50th anniversary of the signing of both the Wilderness Act and the Land and Water Conservation Act, two little-known but powerful conservation programs established by Congress just in time to preserve some of America's most valuable wildlands and rivers. Outdoor recreation on these protected lands generates more than $600 billion a year to the U.S. economy.
Sounds like big government regulation. Let's get rid of that immediately. For much more on all of that and the stories we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Please consider donating to our effort to report the news that matters over your public airwaves. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Oh, baby, it's a wild world. It's hard to get by just upon the smile.
Your proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Come on, ya good workers, good news to you I'll tell. About the good old union has come in here to dwell. Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Yes, the age-old question. Which side are you on? Are you on the corporate side or are you on the worker side? It doesn't get any simpler than that. And I know a lot of people go, well, you know, I'm neutral. I'm independent. I'm in the middle. Which is nonsense. Honestly, it's what we're told we're supposed to say. We're in the middle. But at the end of the day, you got to pick sides. It's like anything. You've got to decide which side of the equation are you on. And I look at Detroit, where, you know, a bit ago we talked about, you know, the water there. Are you on the side of the water company and the people who are trying to make it look even more profitable so they can privatize it and suck money out of it, or are you on the side of the people who are being saddled with these bills that, sadly, no jobs in the area, they're not going to be able to pay, and they're going to be left without water? I mean, stop and think about it. In this country, there are going to be a large number of citizens without access to water. And, you know, I start going, well, can you just walk down to the lake and take water and yourself? And the question then becomes, I don't know. You know, have we made this such a commodity that, you know, I don't know? Amazing stuff for me. Brian sent me an email during the break, said, Rick, earlier you talked about water in Detroit. Have you seen this article from Texas? And he sent me an article about what's going on with one of the aquifers in Texas, this Carrizo-Wilcox aquifer in the center of the state, that, according to the Texas Tribune, is in the middle of this fight over whose water is it. Because evidently in Texas, they've set up these things called groundwater conservation districts. The idea was, you know, to try and have, you know, local control over these aquifers, and try and treat groundwater as a private property right. So, you know, you got these underground aquifers who we're going to be fighting over who owns them. And you look at these corporations who, well, they want it. They want the groundwater so that they can sell it. And it's where their profit is made. And you've had these massive droughts to where now water is this precious commodity. And it brings me to a whole bunch of questions, you know, not just in Texas, but across this country. You know, as water becomes more of a precious commodity, as we continue to see the Southwest just dry up before our very eyes, do they then start trucking water from the Northeast, or another pipeline, if you will, to the Northeast, from the Northeast to the Southwest, taking water from this area, thus raising our costs as well. Do you start seeing that? All for private purposes. And of course, for a profit. I mean, there's always got to be the profit margin. And it made me think of, and thank you, Brian, for the email, and thank you for pointing it out. It made me think about a piece of property my wife and I were going to buy a couple years back. We were looking for, decent-sized acreage right when we first got married, before we had kids, with the idea, my wife's a big horse nut. I am not. But she wanted to have horses. So that if we had children, they'd grow up in the same environment that she grew up on, which, from someone who grew up in a housing project, so that to think that my kids could have that kind of farm life upbringing and completely different than I grew up with, seemed attractive to me at the time. So we're looking for land, and there was one place that was perfect, except it had a stream running through it. And the real estate agent said, you can't go in that stream. The water is private property. You can't even put your feet in it. That's where we're heading. Anyway, if you missed any portion of the program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go get the podcasts. The Rick Smith Show app for your smartphone. Take the program where you go. Thanks for being here. Look forward to seeing you back here after the weekend. Have a great weekend. See you back here on Monday.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's color like the tide of flood beneath the lunar sway. Imperial, mysterious, in amorous array. Democracy is coming.